Alison.
Yes, I didn't hear the ping.
It went. We're good.
Okay. Thank you, Google. Thank you so much. All right. Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio 44, Feminist Academia, with special guest Warren Farrell. So those of you who don't know who Warren Farrell is an American educator, activist, and author of 7 books on men's and women's issues, including Why Men Earn More and The Myth of Male Power. So it's great to have him on the show and bring his thoughts about feminism and academia. Hi, Warren.
Hello, good. It's really good to be back again. I just had a terrific time last show.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So why don't we start with when did you start to move away from feminism as a philosophy in your own writing and your own concept?
It really happened very slowly. I think the first, I was on the board of the National Organization for Women in the early 70s for about 3 or 4 years, and I guess I was the only man ever elected 3 times. But and that was in the 1974. My former wife became a White House fellow, so we moved down to Washington D.C. Then when I came back, I was invited to be more involved with the board of Now Again and run for a higher office. But I began to have some tensions with them around the issue of fathers' issues. That is, the board was saying that a lot of women who were getting divorced wanted to be fully, they wanted to have the right to have the children full time, and they felt that they were the ones who, because they knew the children the best, they were the ones who knew the children's best interests. And I said, wait a minute, that's not about equality, that's about territoriality, that's about the assumptions of you being the better gender. And I said, that's exactly the same thing you're complaining about when men were saying that we're the better lawyers, we're the better doctors, we're the better pilots. And and so they really were introspective about it for a while, but they ultimately came to the conclusion that we're the national organization for women and not the national organization. We're the nationalization and not the national organization for equality, basically. And so they everybody on the board voted against me, except Karen DeCrow, who was the national president at that time, weighed in and said that she agreed with my perspective on it and said that that fathers were really important in families and they should be involved in the process. And the issue was not, as I was saying, the issue was not what women's rights were. The issue should be what's best for the children. And we only had a relatively small amount of research at that time, but what small amount of research we did have indicated that children did best when they had both about equal amounts of time of mother and father, and when the mother and father lived close to each other, and when there was no bad mouthing between mother and father or father and mother. Those were the 3 things that we sort of sensed at that time. As it's turned out, when I did the research for Father and Child Reunion, by the time I finished that research was much more complete, and it was really clear that children did much better when they had those 3 variables: equal time with both parents, no bad mouthing, and the mother and father living close together. And so that created my first rifts with Now. But even then, I was still speaking all around the country, basically sponsored by the feminist portions of the women's studies centers and the women's studies departments around the U.S. and Canada. But I was noticing that when I did my primary experience, which was to get men and women to walk a mile in each other's moccasins to experience what life was like in the other one's shoes, I was asking every woman, or every man rather, to become part of what I called the beauty contest of everyday life that women were automatically a part of. And so I had every man come up on stage and be in this beauty contest of everyday life, and every man became a loser except the one winner. And so they experienced what that was like to have all of their identity focused on their physicality. But I said, now the job here is to walk a mile in each other's moccasins. And so I asked all the women to sit in rows, predicting what type of money they'd be earning 5 years after graduation, based on what majors they had. And the women who had graduated already, I asked them to sit in rows according to how much money they actually made. And then I reworked the men to only be interested, to make believe that they were going to be the primary breadwinners, and therefore that how much the woman was making, the primary caretakers, and therefore it was extremely important how much the women were making, to not look at the women for beauty purposes, but rather to look at the women for future potential for their children, living in a good school district, etc. Then I asked the women to ask the men out on a role reversal date, and this is what changed everything. All the feminists who had invited me, and we're usually sitting together, the feminist studies teachers, were sitting together usually in a row of about 6, 7, or 10. They had all of them had almost always invited me out for tea or whatever after I finished speaking. And they loved it when I did the men's beauty contest, which helped the men understand the woman's perspective. But as soon as I started asking the women to come forth and risk the rejection that typically that men experience, they were freaking out. But they were not interested at all, and they would disappear. They would walk out. And the other sort of adult, strongest feminists would walk out with them. And I'm saying, wait a minute, you've paid money to bring me here to get both, presumably to talk about equality. I am talking about equality. 90% of my message is from the feminist perspective. And the moment I ask you to participate in the men's perspective for one moment, you can't handle it. What does that say about your open-mindedness, about the very concept of this being an education, not a dictatorship of ideology? And but most of the time, I didn't even have a chance to ask the women those questions, although I did call them up afterwards, and they usually were pretty meek about it and came up with some reason, and or expressed disappointment. And the usual disappointment was some version of, Warren, this is a man's world. We don't need to be helping women understand men. We need to be helping men understand women. We love the first part of what you did, but the second part only reinforces patriarchy. And so that got me into looking at what women's studies courses were doing, because these were all women's studies courses that were sponsoring me. And my response was, oh, wait a minute, the very essence of women's studies is to get people to question their roles. And the gift of women's studies is you're saying that that people like Madame Curie and Harriet Tubman and Marian Evans, these were leaders. These were people who are helping women not be invisible in being in an alternative role. And they would say, no, the world's about a patriarchy. It's the patriarchy made rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And I said, that's taking the old civil rights model of oppressor oppressed. But if men were the oppressors, they wouldn't have made rules to send themselves to war and die. They wouldn't be buying diamonds for the oppressed in order to get them to marry them. They wouldn't be carrying swords to be able to kill anybody that insulted their fiancé, as people called gentlemen did in the 19th century. That is not an adequate model for understanding what men and women are about. And so they said, well, what is an adequate model? I said, the issue is not patriarchy or matriarchy. The issue is survival. The survival was the dominant force, and you need to understand that that both men and women sacrifice their lives in different ways. Women sacrifice their possibility of living in childbirth. Men sacrifice the possibility of living by going to war to protect the children that women bore. And so we both had roles that created sacrifice. And then they would say things like, well, what about women's sacrifice in careers? And I said, yes. Women had a sacrifice of careers, but men had a sacrifice in careers. Men didn't choose careers that were fulfilling, like art history or writing or being an actor. And if they had children, they usually, the more you follow your bliss, the more the money you'll miss. And people sacrificed their men did what could support 10, 12 children and a wife, and put food over the head in the name of survival. Career was not a luxury in those days when you had that many people to support. They couldn't hear any of it, and that sort of created my drift from saying that yes, women's studies, fine, but not women's studies without men's studies, because you then get into men as the oppressor, women as the oppressed. And so that was I would say things like feminism calls it sexism to refer to God as he, but it doesn't. They don't call it sexism to refer to the devil as she, and that was a metaphor for the problems with women's studies.
I just wanted to point out, when I was listening to this, and you spoke about that role reversal concept that you did, where you had the men engage in a beauty pageant, and then you had the women order themselves based on their income and also risk rejection by approaching the men. Now, what occurs to me is when the feminists got upset with that, by their own theory, you would have been inviting women into the male role, which according to their theory is the liberated role, the powerful role, and yet they rejected that based on what? I mean, you were inviting women to experience what it was like to be a man. By feminist theory, that is experiencing power. That's experiencing liberation. And yet they refused.
That is exactly right. And when I would respond somewhat to that effect, but maybe not as articulately as you just did, they would just sidestep it and say, it's a patriarchal world. And when I would say, if it's such a patriarchal world, and that where you have all the power, why are you afraid of partaking in that? And so, do you feel powerful doing that? And they would say, we don't need to They would often say things like, we don't need to understand men. Men already rule. And then I'd go back to your logic, and it would just be like we're two ships passing in the night. And that saddened me, Alison, so much, because these were my friends. Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan. These were people I hung out with. These were people that I respected. They respected me. And it was like the people I really thought were friends were suddenly disconnecting for me. I was on a TV show with Gloria, that it was a national show, and I'd been on the show many times, and I said, that the pay gap between men and women is more than about discrimination, that there's about 25 things that women and men do that are different in the workplace, and every single one of them are things that women can do, but every single one of them are things that men tend to do more frequently that lead to men earning more income. And she was like stunned, and she looked at me, she looked at the producer of the show, and it was the Home Show, which is a national show for quite a while. And she looked at the producer of the show, and it was she looked like like a cut. And sure enough, the producer went to commercial right away. And then she said, "That's all we'll be needing." And it was right in the middle of a thought. And it was like, and then the show never aired. And I had been on the show 8 times, never called back. I had been very close to Gloria Steinem for quite a while, not in any romantic way, just in a colleague way. And she never returned a phone call after that. I even sent her a phone from Toys R Us in case the real phone was broken. And so, just tried to put humor into the situation, never returned phone call. And so it was, I'm afraid, is even more so now. It is that rigid. With all the books I've written on these issues, I could never get a job at a major university, small university probably, but not a major university speaking about these, teaching about these issues.
So now that we've sort of covered why you started to get into these issues in particular, can you say more about your reception? You talked about your reception with your colleagues, but what was your reception academically in the academic sphere?
Well, when I started out, and I was during the Board of Now period of time, I was being sought by universities. Columbia University asked me if I would teach there, and I would have taught there, except for the fact that was the year I was offered that, the year that my former wife became the White House Fellow, so we had to move to Washington, D.C. And then the year before that, I had taught at Brooklyn College and City University. And I taught women's studies there. Then my former wife and I got divorced, and I moved out to San Diego, and I taught in the women's studies department out there for a year or two. But during that period of time, I was beginning to write a bit more about sort of the value of seeing the male point of view as well. And I wrote my first. I had published a number of op-eds in the New York Times, and then I wrote my first one that was empathetic to men. And that was the first one that had been rejected. And the next 29 submissions to the New York Times, they were all rejected until finally one got published as a result of a contact I had with the New York Times through Michael Lewis, who fortunately sort of created a way of the author of Moneyball created a way of getting that connection to the New York Times. But until then, I had 29 rejections after never having had a rejection when I was taking only the feminist perspective. So lots of things were sort of happening to create the disconnect. I found out from somebody that I was turned down for that they had me on the finalist list for the MacArthur Genius Award, and somebody argued that I had begun to take a not such a feminist position, and so they argued that I shouldn't be considered for that award. And so there was just a lot of things happening like that created one disconnect after the other that I was hearing about.
And I suppose I'd be amiss if I didn't mention the more recent experience in the University of Toronto, the student protests there. Do you want to say some or describe what it was like attempting to lecture at the University of Toronto?
Yeah, it was really an amazing experience. I was asked a couple of years ago to speak at the University of Toronto on the first findings of a book that I've been working on for the last few years. It's a book called The Boy Crisis that I'm co-authoring with John Gray. That'll be out. It won't be out for another year yet, but so I'm still working on it now. And so I spoke. I went to speak up there, and this was sponsored by CAFE, which is the Canadian Association for Equality, and it's an organization that had sponsored a number of other feminist sort of people like myself who believed in equality, but also believed in the male perspective on equality. And they were becoming an organization on campus that did not get funding from the University of Toronto. Nevertheless, their mere existence, even amid there being many women's organizations on campus that were getting funding, that was threatening the feminists on campus enough that they categorized the organization CAFE as hate speech, and so I heard that, and then when CAFE invited me up to speak on the boy crisis, like I was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It was like the World Trade Center being the symbol of capitalism type of thing. I was the symbol of sort of like everything you should hate. And so they decided so they ripped all the posters down. And so the CAFE told me that they put posters up, in the middle of the night, and did it at all sorts of times. But that most of the time, the second daylight came, it was like 45 minutes seemed to be the average time the posters remained up there to advertise my talk. So they also did stuff on the internet and so on. And eventually, a large number of people did show up. But by the time when they showed up, that a group of a Socialist Worker Party feminists had organized a group of people to protest my presentation. And the protest was not just a protest. I'm a strong proponent of protests, but the protest was a blockade of the doors to the University of Toronto's auditorium where I was speaking. And so people couldn't get in. Now, normally speaking, I've only had one protest before, and when I did have that at Town Hall years before when the myth of male power came out, I went out, I spoke with the protesters, and I got the organizers of the Town Hall meeting to get permission to have the protesters have free seats in my presentation, invited them up toward the front of my presentation, and just asked them that we had one thing to our deal, that they not do anything to inhibit the presentation. They agreed to that, and they became very strong supporters of what I was doing ultimately. But with this presentation, the police said, "You do not want to go there," and so I was dismissing the police and hissing them, and not hissing them, but dismissing them, and said, no, let me see what the situation is like. And the anger and the venom made me, who has a fair amount of courage about these types of things, just say, okay, you're right. I went in through the back door. I got into the back door to the green room. I could hear from the women on the outside, 90% women, about 10% men, shouting so loud, "F Warren Farrell." Warren Farrell is, the devil, basically, but words that were a lot worse than that. And I could hear it so well from the outside, through the doors, through the auditorium, back into the green room, behind the curtains, that I called my wife and I said, "Listen to this." She could hear on the phone the shouting of the anger of their voices. And so it was like, it was scary. And so the huge numbers of people just, turned back away and went home and never came to the presentation. So the University of Toronto police could not handle the crowd because they're not allowed to touch people physically. So they called in the City of Toronto police, who took about 40 minutes, 30 minutes to get there. And then when they finally got there, the feminists were saying, and you can see all of this. Fortunately, the whole thing was, a good part of it was YouTube by somebody named Steve Brule, or Steve Brule. So just go Steve Brule, B-R-U-L-E, or just do Warren Farrell, U of Toronto, and you'll see the direct evidence of this and see that, I'm not exaggerating at all. These women were giving the finger to the police. They were telling the police, they were swearing at the police, and things that if men were doing that to the police, they would be arrested immediately, but the police didn't touch the women. They only prevented the women from continuing the blockade. So it was a really, and from that, the good news was that it just happened to be somebody that was doing a story on father's issues that was covering it, Steve Brule, and he did, and he filmed a lot of it. So this description would be incredible and seem like it was an exaggeration if you didn't have the ability to go, online and actually see what I'm talking about, being sort of a de-exaggeration of what you will see when you check that out.
Just so people know, I just put a link in the low bar for that particular event. It has to be seen to be believed. There's one young man during the protest who there's a woman just spitting venom at him. And what was interesting is I on my channel did sort of a visual comparison between the way he reacted to this in this situation and the way the young woman, the black woman who was going through a crowd of white protesters during the desegregation during the civil rights era.
Wow.
Exact same expression on both of their faces.
Wow, that's fascinating. Do you have that on your website?
Yeah, I do. I could get it. It would just take a moment, but and I could show it to you. But it was really something else. And so I created a video that compared the two. I want to actually bring in Theron right now because her and her vice president have some experience with these kinds of sort of vitriolic feminism in academia. Theron, are you able to speak at the moment? I'm just asking because there's always usually incredible technical difficulties with the mute button. Yeah, looks like she can.
Yeah, I'm right here. Well, yes, Jessie and I both have had our fair share of experiences with the feminist bureaucracy and feminist academia. Actually, just this week, we probably had the worst experience with.
I wanted to die.
Yeah, worst experience with like these social justice warrior, far left, progressive feminist types that I've ever had. And I actually just did a vlog about it on my channel, but I'll, Jessie, do you want to start and just say more or less what went down? Because it's definitely
a so our university, SFU, also has kind of their own type of looking at men's issues, which is really just feminism with a new label. But they decided to bring the people from a neighboring school that have what they call a men's circle to come and talk about it, because I had talked to them and said, well, men's circle's pretty interesting, we should look at this. And it ended up not being a men's circle. Like, from the start, they were like, so we use this tool to address men who have assaulted women. And right there, it was not at all about male healing or addressing men's issues. It was just about trying to make men do the labor of feminism, which I think is an actual quote. But yeah.
Yeah, it was basically their framework was all based on the idea of accountability. So if there were men who are exhibiting what the university bureaucracy deemed as problematic behavior, they would be sent to this, quote, men's circle, and basically get told, oh, you know what you're doing is wrong and you're perpetuating the patriarchy. Yeah, so it's using this language of a men's circle to not only chastise men, but also there was this idea of men needing to be held accountable for other men's actions.
Yeah.
You know, the entire patriarchy framework, and that's where they were coming from. And I took several issues with that approach, and I told them that
you
they're
made a
full
guy
of...
cry.
Oh yeah, I made a male feminist cry. I brought him to tears because I was so harsh.
Theron insinuated that maybe the abuse he had suffered was because the person was shitty, not because of patriarchy, and that made him upset.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was laughing, but it's horrible. It's sort of sad at the same time. That so he was essentially someone who was abused who went to the men's circle and ended up agreeing that he was the problem through patriarchy. Is this what essentially you're saying?
He didn't actually go to the men's circle. It was just he interrupted Theron's critique of their version of the men's circle with his personal story about this, and then Theron wasn't allowed to respond because that would have been invalidating his feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, basically what this men's circle does, and they told us, you know, they have a huge turnover. People leave all the time, like men leave. And I was like, yeah, of course they leave because they're attracted to this idea of a men's circle where maybe they can like talk, let things out, maybe learn better coping strategies from fellow men. Instead, they get told how they're horrible oppressors, and nobody has interest in addressing maybe the root of their issues or anything. The only interest they have is telling them to be better feminists.
And indoctrinating them into it. I mean, the whole thing was steeped in this idea. Like, I think they said that the reason we have gender issues is because Canada is here without consent. Like, the British didn't ask the Indigenous people if they could have a country here, and this is one of the causes for gendered violence, and I felt like that was a real non sequitur.
Yeah, another thing that they did was, so I posited the idea that, you know, what about a man who was horribly abused by his mother? And, you know, how is that the fault of the patriarchy? Isn't the patriarchy like abusive men and submissive women? And then the one guy from the men's circle was like, well, I know I didn't receive the love that I should have gotten from my mother. This was a white guy, and he was like, I didn't receive that love because of colonialism and because of the history the history of white violence, and so that's just part of the white supremacist capitalist cis-normative heteropatriarchy as well.
Yeah, and
actually, that system of colonialism and imperialism, if you will, is a history of men and women cooperating. We cooperated to get the land that we took from other people. Men and women both benefited from that. Women are living on the land in which many men, often walking over the graves in which many men died, getting that land. You can call that colonialism, but it's not a perpetuation of differences between the genders. Women fell in love with the officer and the gentleman, not the conscientious objector, and so it's or the private and the pacifist, if you will, and so the logic is really the opposite of any logic that might make sense.
Okay, I wanted to actually bring it back to the topic and talk about your challenges in creating, actually just to Theron, your challenges in creating the Simon Fraser Men and Boys Society. Did I get the name right?
It's the Simon Fraser Advocacy for Men and Boys Club or Society. I usually say club, but some people say society. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, so about in like June, July, I decided to get this club going with Phil. You know Phil, Alison. Behind the scenes, he's from Cafe, but like on the forefront was like me and another student, female student, and we were having some trouble. My female, my friend, my student friend, she tried to get the club going since last year, January. So when I started to join her and we really started pushing, they finally started actually looking at our club application, because our club application was in review for months and months and months. And it was due in part that our club application, unlike any other club application, had to go through the Women's Centre.
The argument for that was that the SFU has a rule that you can't have a club, you can't make a new club if a club of the same type already exists. Like if I want to have a soccer club and there's already a soccer club, I'm just supposed to join that one. This doesn't prevent them from having a Christian club from every single Asian country. But the argument they made was that since we were worried about gendered issues, and the Women's Centre is worried about gendered issues, we really should just do our work through the Women's Centre. So
anyways, so that's why that's it. They were kind of basically cock blocking us, the Women's Centre. So I threw a bit of a fit, and I think the fact that that it was two women doing it really, really helped. If it were two men, we'd probably still be sitting without any kind of a club. And the reasoning behind not wanting to give us club status all had to do with the typical things. You know, we're afraid that you might be affiliated with a Voice for Men, and Cafe has a bad track record, and what I did was I was in the meeting with the representative of the Women's Centre, and I was taking down notes of exactly what she was saying and every claim she made of why we don't deserve club status. And I went back home that day and I wrote an extensive email refuting every single one of her claims with citations, and I sent it out to the entire SFSS, like everyone that was possibly involved. I emailed it to everyone, including her, and that kind of pressure seemed to help to get our club going. Anyway, yeah. Alison?
Oh, actually, I just wanted to point out that it's interesting that women, and I've noticed this too, like when they silence men's issues, they also silence an aspect of femininity or being female, which is the potential to do harm. But if you have the potential to do harm, you also have the potential to do good. So in silencing men's issues, they are also silencing women. They're also silencing an aspect of women's own existence, which, in order to advance a particular view of reality, in which I say this repeatedly, that they reduce women down to how they're acted upon and almost nothing else, and they reduce men down to how they act upon women and almost nothing else. So it's almost the most strict gender roles of all of human history. That they reduce women down to simply being an object and men down to simply being actors. Mm-hmm. And then they turn around and say that they accuse everybody else of doing what they're doing. But did you want to respond to what Theron was saying about her difficulties in creating the SFU advocacy for men and boys, or shall we take some letters?
I wanted to add one thing to this, which is to sort of validate her experience with the men's group. I've started a few hundred men's groups, and when I started the process, it was as a result of the Board of Now in New York City asking me to start they had a big argument about whether or not men should be kicked out of Now, and it should be exclusively a women's organization. And this was an argument that the National Now was having, and New York City Now joined in. And so New York City Now suggested that they would ask me to start men's groups, men's awareness groups, men's what they called consciousness raising groups, that would have the men separated out from women so that the men could not interfere with the women feeling comfortable sharing emotionally alone with each other. And so I did that, and that worked. And so they asked me to start a number of other men's groups. And so I started a lot of other men's groups. And then I realized I wanted to write a book on these issues, and so I asked for permission for the men's groups for me to be able to tape record them, and so I did tape, and they agreed, and I taped them, and then I started listening, and many of the men's groups were held at my home, and oftentimes they would be there, very excited. I'd hear them talk, and I would do exactly what you were just describing some of the feminists doing. I would give them the feminist explanation of why their feelings were incomplete. And usually by 10 o'clock, the group would sort of get fidgety and they'd want to leave. And so I then listened to myself giving these sort of like analyses of the incompleteness of their feelings based on feminist ideology. And I said this, that Psychology 101 would understand that this is not a good way to draw people's feelings out from them. So Warren, shut your mouth and just listen to what they're saying. But better than that, facilitate more with your eyes about what their experiences are. Don't deny their experiences. And shortly after that, my former wife would say about 1 o'clock in the morning, maybe they could leave now. We have to get up early in the morning. At least she did. And so the point being that when men are allowed to express their feelings and there's a safe environment for it, and there's not some jerk like me sort of telling them why their feelings are wrong, they do begin to open up, but there needs to be a safe environment for it. And most men have gone into their caves because they felt that there wasn't a safe environment, sharing their real vulnerabilities, that they knew on an intuitive level that whenever they expressed a feeling that was negative, that felt like a whining male. And women fell in love with alpha men, not whining men. And so they just shut up and kept their feelings to themselves. And that's really hard on guys because men emotionally have all their emotional eggs in the basket, oftentimes of women if they're heterosexuals. And when women withdraw from them either emotionally or sexually, when they express feelings that aren't comfortable to hear, men don't find it easy to go to other men. They don't find it easy to go to their parents if there's a divorce, and they're much more likely to commit suicide and turn in on themselves, turn into drinking, drugs, gambling, and act out in negative types of ways.
When you were talking about that, an article that I read a while ago occurred to me. It was about a woman who's starting up a therapy practice.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, she noticed that she ended up getting a lot of men in her therapy practice. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is that she realized eventually that she got a lot of men in her therapy practice because she listened to them. Mm-hmm. And when she started out, before she started this therapy practice, she was sort of a typical late 30s single woman who really wanted to find the one to complete her life, and was very, very, very sort of strict about which type of guy she wanted. Essentially, a guy to fill all of her own insecurities and flaws as she perceived them. As she opened this therapy session, she started this therapy, and she got all these male clients, and she would listen to them to try to understand their point of view because she was the therapist. She started to hear about all of their insecurities and all of their vulnerabilities and their concerns and their feelings of being intimidated by women because of women's judgmentalness and wanting them to be perfect and all of this kind of stuff. And as she was listening to it, she realized, as she started to incorporate their experiences and their point of view into her life, she actually evolved herself. And she stopped being so focused on finding a man to complete herself. Like, she didn't stop wanting to have companionship, but she stopped thinking about men in terms of being completed by one. Mm-hmm. So what really happened was, by sharing their vulnerabilities, in a way they empowered and completed her as a female human.
Yes.
And they allowed her to move past some of those obsessions that I think hold back a lot of women.
You're absolutely right, and it's the essence of, if women say that they're the nurturing gender, to listen in this type of non-defensive way would be a core part of their personality. And feminism represents really a denial of some of the very best parts of women traditionally, which is to be able to listen. But unfortunately, there's really often a contradiction there. That is, oftentimes the desire to be protected leads many women to feel not protected when men say something that is critical, or or they feel that the man feels like if he expresses like a fear of doing well on his job, or a fear of going into court the next day because he doesn't feel as competent as the other lawyer, or then he feels oftentimes his wife or woman friend loses respect for him, and so he learns to shut up about those things. It's very, very rare that a man will say, gee, in the process of I wanted to ask you out for years, but I was afraid of rejection, and I was afraid if I came up this way and said this, I would be seen as a jerk, or if I came up this way, if I didn't come up at all, I would never even get your attention, or that I was at the party with you, but I saw you talking to somebody else, and I thought that maybe you wouldn't want that you'd have a reason for wanting him more than me. And all these things that men go through in the process of just connecting with a woman is men don't share. And in a way, you can't really blame women for not hearing what men don't say. On the other hand, it's really important for women to listen, just as it's important for men to listen to women, of course.
Yeah. Well, it seems like in this scenario, it's like a man expressing his vulnerabilities, being human, allowed her to be fully human, to start to realize that she needed to take responsibility. There was no white on shining armor who's going to take responsibility for her flaws and her problems. And that's what I mean when I said with Theron that the feminists were actually silencing an aspect of being female. They're actually silencing a part of being female. Yes. And it's that powerful part where you learn that ain't nobody going to do it but you. Mm-hmm. So Theron wanted to speak, so I'm going to let her take the floor.
Well, I just wanted to add something. I mean, there are various reasons why I don't think, a feminist space would ever be a space fitting for something like a men's circle, or anything that shares the function of a men's circle. That would be like, giving a space for men to express their vulnerability. Because I find, and I think it's justified, that a lot of men's emotions, at least at first, it's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger and frustration. And I happen to understand and try to understand that anger often comes from pain, from hurt, from, some kind of damage. But feminists, from my experience, tend to see that as men just being angry for the sake of being angry, men trying to assert their male privilege or to assert their male dominance. And that lack of insight is kind of fundamentally flawed.
There's also victim blaming, right? I mean, if you need men to accept that the patriarchy is the cause, well, patriarchy means rule of men. So you have to. The first step is to victim blame right there. Oh, if you're hurt as a guy, and it's because of the patriarchy, so it's your own fault in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and Theron, I think you're absolutely right that one of the best ways to understand anger is that anger is vulnerability's mask. That when I do a lot of work with couples communication, I teach couples communication, and what I teach people to do is one of the things I teach people to do is to understand that the more you love somebody, the more you feel vulnerable to being disconnected from them, from losing their love. And so if they distort you or betray you, you're much more likely to get angry than you are to get angry at somebody who says the same thing that you meet on a plane as a stranger. And so the more I teach people in my workshop to be able to make it safe for their feelings to be heard by their partner and vice versa, the more they come to love each other and trust each other. And if they do, and if after they start loving and trusting each other more, there is a break in that trust or a betrayal, there's a chance that the anger will be greater than it ever has been before because your pain is greater than it ever has been before. And it's helpful for people as they're hearing their partner get angry or somebody to get angry to just, instead of seeing the anger, is to feel the vulnerability that is harbored within the anger, that is the volcano from which that anger has erupted.
Yeah, it is very true, and I think that's really what they want to suppress the expression of anger because it's behind it is the truth, which is the vulnerability of men, and you can see the continuing thread throughout all of this.
And the
Feminism.
truth that men are humans, you know?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what's trying to be masked at all costs, is that men are human beings.
Well, that men are vulnerable, or that men can be acted upon. It's like I said, they're asserting these incredibly strict gender roles. Women are acted upon, men are actors, and
Well,
anything that doesn't fit, they just ostracize.
absolutely. And that it's also a denial of introspection. So, for example, both sexes have ways of objectifying the sex when they feel vulnerable to them. Both sexes turn women, like a man who's a construction worker, when he whistles to a woman and calls her beautiful or whatever. He does that in part because it hurts less to be rejected by an object than it does to be rejected by a full human being. If a woman turned around who he had whistled to and started making a real connection to him and said, "Gee, you're handsome. I've always wanted a handsome guy and a strong guy like you that's a hard worker," instead of these wimpy guys I've been going out with in the past, he wouldn't keep objectifying her, because suddenly it would become a reality that he might actually have a relationship with her, and he might actually, so he would be required to see her as a human being. But women do the same thing. If they go out with a guy and the guy is not somebody they're interested in, and he doesn't call the next day, they're relieved that he hasn't called the next day. But if they suddenly see the possibility of a man that really they can connect with and have a future with, and they think that he's going to call the next day and he doesn't, and they wait 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and he hasn't called, and yet they had such intimacy on that first date, she might say to her woman friend, what a jerk he was. And they would all agree he was a jerk. And the reason they objectify him is because it hurts less to be rejected by a jerk than it does to be rejected by somebody who say, he was a wonderful guy, but I guess he decided that he was wonderful enough that I was not as good as he was, and he was out of my league. To acknowledge that would be introspection, or a portion of introspection, but to call him a jerk is to turn the man into an object, because it hurts less to be rejected by an object or a jerk than it does to be rejected by a full human being.
Yeah, certainly. Well, we've strayed a little bit off topic, so I'm going to bring it back, and I'm going to queue up Hannah to read the first email that we received. And again, if you want to talk to any topics on relationships, men's mental health, or dealing with feminism, then send your emails to topic@badgerpod.com. So go ahead, Hannah.
Before I go into the letter, I just want to say that last point kind of contributes as a point to understand a little bit about why both sexes seek out jerks from among the opposite sex as well. Because if you're going to risk rejection, you might as well risk rejection from somebody that you can say, well, they weren't really good enough anyway.
Yes.
But
and in the male role is very vulnerable to being called a jerk, because when I did those role reversal things I was talking about, and we asked the women what they felt, almost all the women said, I feel like a jerk, because they started promising something to the man in order to get him to accept her. And if she felt vulnerable, she would say, I have a really great Maserati, or I can really take you away on a vacation. And and in reality, she didn't feel she could afford a vacation, and she didn't have a Maserati. But she was so fearful of rejection, she started exaggerating things. And so, a jerk is a potential hero who messes it up along the way.
Yeah.
Women fall in love with jerks because they fall in love with the potential for him being a hero, but oftentimes in the process, he messes it up along the way and becomes a jerk.
Yeah. And on to the letters. Daniel A. writes, hello, Badgers. First off, just to get it out of the way, thank you so much for what you guys do. It is so refreshing to hear people call this nonsense out, etc. You know the drill. Insert whatever accolades you want here. Boy, that's a pretty big blank check to write to a bunch of women. Anyway, I was talking to a friend the other day who recently had decided to stop pursuing teaching and move to another career. We were discussing a blog post about the topic. The blog post listed is on a blog called, this looks like it says kararevsblog.wordpress.com, and the title of it is A Not So Graceful Exit Why I Left Teaching. He writes, she pointed out one statement from a post that really caught my eye. My friend mentions that the article describes teaching as a job where you are often blamed more than revered. I found this turn of phrase to be very insightful into why so many people are getting into teaching and are being let down by it nowadays. Truth be told, in most jobs you get blamed more than you are revered. How many jobs can you honestly claim are revered at all or even admired? And yet it rings true to me that when you get into teaching, there is an expectation of being respected or at least admired. That, combined with the relative ease of entry into the career and it being a guaranteed stable job if you manage to stick with it, makes teaching seem like a fantastic choice for a lot of kids going to college. However, with the rise of the internet and the widespread access to internet information, it seems to me that the importance of teachers are quickly diminishing. If you want to learn something, you no longer need to actually attend college and sit through lectures. You can just Google it and get all the information you could want. In fact, I bet that an hour of reading up on the topic of your choice online would net you more knowledge than if you were to sit through an hour-long lecture, with the added bonus of you being able to control where the learning goes. Now, to be fair, this is a bit different for more technical degrees, since having labs and workstations to practice your trade is rather important. But I think we can all agree there is a distinct difference between a professor who teaches a more liberal arts subject over one who teaches a more technical subject like engineering. Anyway, the only real benefit modern-day liberal arts professors have over the internet is you can have a human relationship with them. You can get that emotional fulfillment of interacting positively with a professor that you might not otherwise get if you spend all your day reading stuff online. What this means is that modern-day liberal arts educators are no longer being valued for the knowledge they bring, but for the friendship they bring. This explains why teacher evaluations from the students are becoming so important in many schools. Whereas before it was considered better for a teacher to stay detached, impartial, and objective, now their value is derived from being intimate and familial. Before, it was okay to be disliked by students because the knowledge you have held was what was being valued, but now it's more important to be liked than to have academic integrity. This, along with the ease of entry, is leading the position of professor losing its respectability in the eyes of students. People tend not to revere or respect their friends in the same way that they revere or respect a mentor. But more importantly for the honey badgers, I fear this is a big part of what is enabling a lot of this nonsense that's happening in academia today. Teachers are not only afraid to speak out against this nonsense for fear of the students' wrath, but are in fact rewarded for enabling them by being seen as a cool teacher and thereby getting more positive reviews. Anyway, I know this is a lot of words to say something we might have already known, but I just wanted to explore some possibilities as to why professors are enabling this so hard. Thank you for your time, and I wish you guys the best of luck. I got to speak to this for a couple of reasons. Being a teacher's kid and having also been at university, 2 different universities in the 90s when this stuff was rampant, and it wasn't a popularity contest issue at all. The first thing that I would point out is it's not the human connection is important, but it's not a friendship aspect of it. Part of the problem is that very many people do not realize they can teach themselves things that are not necessarily technical. Like obviously you can't teach yourself brain surgery. I don't want to go to a brain surgeon that's self-taught ever. But you can teach yourself photography. I was a photography professor, an adjunct professor, because I don't have a degree, but I do have decades of professional experience. And what my students were learning, my position as a professor was not in disseminating the information, but in helping them understand where to get it, how to get it, what's good information, what's not worth their time, things like that. Not teaching them just the subject, but teaching them how to learn the subject. And I think part of the problem with a lot of the education profession today is they don't understand that that's their job. They're more interested in spoon feeding and less interested in helping the students teach themselves. Because when you're a teacher, you call yourself a teacher, it's kind of an inaccurate description. And this is the way my family, the teachers in my family, have always approached education. is that their job was to teach the students to learn, not to teach the students, not to hand out tidbits of information and trivia, but to actually help the students explore the subject so that the students could actually retain something they can use. And this problem of college professors facilitating the sort of Tumblrina atmosphere at university isn't necessarily based in them trying to obtain popularity among the students to validate themselves. It's a lot of times coming from it being their perspective. The identity politics perspective, the social justice perspective, the progressivism or conservative feminism perspective, these are all things that have been present at universities for decades. The 60s was when women's studies started. And this was something that was facilitated by professors back then. In the 80s, my father was going for his master's degree, and journalism school basically was rife with this type of attitude. He had to hear somebody as an argument against something he said in class. Their argument against a statement of socio-political significance was, well, you're just a middle-aged, middle-class, white male oppressor. And that was supposed to negate what he had said. Like, he'd spent 5 minutes saying something. I was sitting there in class with him. He let me come to class with him. And I'm sitting here. It was a seminar-type class, so they were all in discussion. And he spends 5 minutes talking, and this woman stands up and says that, and that's like the end of the argument. Didn't address a single thing he said. And the professor, just sort of went on to the next thing. Didn't say, you guys aren't really discussing. That wasn't really an argument. Do you have something else to bring to the table? She just let it slide. And it was approved. And that was a frequent thing. So I don't think it's a popularity issue. There's an issue, I think, of some professors trying to insert that into the student body mentality rather than necessarily just going along with it.
Warren, did you have anything to say to that, or?
Boy, yes. It is so deeply sad that I grew up was in school in the early '60s, and and it was like the essence of our protest against the Vietnam War, and there was a free speech movement in Berkeley with Mario Savio and a number of people there were they were protesting McCarthyism and advocating free speech. And so for me, liberal arts growing up was like the core of freedom of speech and confronting the McCarthyism of making people fearful of whatever they say. And now the liberal arts, the social sciences, has become the core of political correctness and closedness of speech. And there could be nothing more oxymoronic than a university closing off thinking of all types in the name of opening up to diversity. There could be nothing sadder than within the university the social sciences being the leader of that. And there could be nothing more sad than gender studies being the shutdown of opinions from both genders, as if women were the only ones that had a perspective on gender. And so it just so, and it does make the internet be a source of comparative learning, when in fact the classroom has, a classroom run well should always be about, when I taught in high school for part of a year, I was during an election year, and I had, all the people, the kids in my class, half of them turn into being Republicans, and then half of them go into being Democrats, and they were at a convention arguing with each other and lobbying each other and so on. Then, 2 days later, I had all the Republicans become Democrats and the Democrats become Republicans and do the same thing in reverse. And it was that doing that at those days we didn't have the internet, but if, that doing is more important because than it ever has been, because the internet takes care of passive knowledge, but it cannot replace the ability of people to interact with each other, to walk a mile in each other's moccasins, to listen to each other. The internet tends to be a siren of Trumpism, bringing out the worst comments and the least listening and the arrogance from each of us, whereas a good teaching classroom brings out the respect for each of us to be able to hear each other. So that teacher, obviously, as we all know, should have immediately labeled what was your father was called and said that is name calling. Name calling is not about the pathway to enlightenment. Facilitating your dad about why he feels more about this than something else, that would be the beginning of education. And so when we have our high schools so fearful of of doing anything that is physical, that is outdoors, like dodgeball or things like that, because we're afraid of somebody getting hurt. That is the feminization of education. It's the undermining of boys being able to develop in school. And when we talk about in school always about the fear of sex, that is part of the feminization of sexuality, as opposed to talking about the joy of sex in school, and talking about equality. If that's expanded to a constructive discussion about women sharing the risks of rejection, rather than blaming men for the rejection that they for the overstepping of bounds that men do very often. And so and all of those things create the foundation of what we now have in California, which is one of the worst laws that, in recent history around gender, which is the affirmative consent law, which says legally that if you're at a California campus and you reach out as a man, or as a woman, technically speaking, but it's rare that way. If you reach out as a man and take a woman's hand and you haven't gotten an affirmative consent first, that is, she doesn't say yes first, you can be sued by that woman for sexual harassment. And it will not be tried in a normal due process setting outside of the university. It will be tried in the university, in which your perspectives will not be seen as being very valid, because if the university does rule in your favor as a man, it will be seen as anti-female and have its federal and state funds be at risk. So this is sort of the how universities, the part of university that should represent the core of openness, has become the core of fear and closeness, and that's so, in my opinion, so deeply sad.
I wanted to add, because when you said, the free speech movement and sort of the liberal values were really tied into the leftist perspective at that, and I would assume that free speech values in Pakistan or free speech values in Afghanistan would necessarily be tied into a leftist movement, a diversity movement, a movement toward secularism, a movement toward individual rights, a movement toward tolerance of gays, lesbians, trans people, all of those things, right? And a movement towards and at least class mobility, if not an end to classism. That would be what would be going on in a Pakistan or an Afghanistan or an India. That those sort of, but when the left began to use the tools of the Enlightenment, the tools of liberalism, right, in order to be able to talk about what they wanted to talk about, express the ideas they wanted to express, and all of those things. And it was the right wing that was stomping down hard on them, right? Liberalism and leftism became conflated, right, in everybody's minds. And now in the United States, oh, you're just a dirty leftist. Oh, you're just a dirty liberal. It means the same thing, right? But there's nothing liberal about speech codes. There's nothing liberal about any of that. What you end up having is you have just all through history, I'm sure, you have anywhere where there is a blossoming of liberal values, where people are allowed to say what they feel. People can criticize the government. People can criticize the status quo. People can do that. It is the people who are the political underdog who value those liberal values. They value them, they use them, they harness them, and they get their work done through the exploitation of those liberal values. Then when they ascend to power, they just become, it's just say hello to the new boss, just as authoritarian as the old boss,
Yes.
right? The liberal values have nothing to do with the left, other than that the left used them as a tool in recent enough memory that that we associate the two as being interchangeable, right? But liberalism has nothing to do with leftist values like socialism and anything like that. It has nothing to do now in Canada, because in Canada we have, in Alberta in particular, we have a very right-wing, conservative but libertarian party that was a contender in our last provincial election, or it would have been if their leadership hadn't shit the bed spectacularly 4 months before the election. But they would have been a contender, and they're very conservative. They're very pro-religious. They're very pro-family. They're very pro this, pro that. But I could join their party. I could run as a member, as a LGBT person who lives in sin with her boyfriend who's 13 years younger than her, right? Like I could do all. They would welcome me because I espouse the things that they espouse: freedom of speech, small government, limited intervention into people's lives, right? People being free to live as they wish, whether they're Theron Meyer, who wants to live as a woman and be a woman, and that is awesome because that's what she is, right? They're fine with that. They're also kind of, they're like, oh, but maybe we shouldn't be introducing 200 different pronouns for people, new pronouns for people in kindergarten to our children in public schools, right? It's a little bit, it's a little much. So essentially what we have is we have the two axes, right? And the one is the left and the right, and the other is authoritarian and libertarian. And because it was because it was leftists who last really exploited, right, the liberal values, right? And now we're seeing this with the new right, cultural libertarianism, with people like Milo Yiannopoulos, Breitbart.com, right? The new free speech movement is a right movement. It's a conservative movement, which is kind of crazy, until you sort of wrap your head around the fact that liberal values really have nothing to do with where you sit on the political spectrum, whether you're how to the right you are or how to the left you are. So
absolutely. If you've heard the Democratic debates and you hear the dialogue between Clinton and Sanders about, in the United States, that is, about being who's the bigger progressive, the word progressive and the word patriotism, those are very deceptive words. No one should ever call themselves a progressive, because that's a self-righteous term that suggests that you have the answer to what progress is. And especially, to say nothing of the fact that, when you create alternative family styles, oftentimes that you can argue that that's progressive because it creates more options for people, and that part of it is progressive. But then when we see children raised without dads, we see an enormous set of problems being an outgrowth of that. And so, is it progressive or isn't it progressive? Well, that's an argument. That's a good argument. And so conservatives and liberals together are checks and balances that often create much more progress than any single ideology alone. The same with patriotism. When you protest a war and you're called not patriotic because you protest a war, well, it may be more patriotic to protest a war, but conservatives try to take a monopoly over the word patriotism, and people who are liberal try to take a monopoly over the word progressive, and both of them are an example of the self-righteousness to think that either one has a monopoly on those terms, and it's the core of what the good, the best constitutionalists understood was a part of any problem was when you don't allow for checks and balances and real freedom of diverse ways of looking at things, you undermine both progressivism and patriotism.
Agreed.
All right, Hannah, let's bring it back to the topic with the next letter.
Next letter, okay. Hi there writes, and that's actually the name that it says on the letter. Hi there writes, hi there HBR. Now before I go on to the post, I want to say a few things. I am grateful what you are doing for men and women by giving voice to the voiceless and shining light to those who dwell in the shadow of white society. I am a psychology student from Finland, so I apologize if my English is not top-notch quality, and I wasn't quite sure where I should go, but I would appreciate it a lot if you could perhaps include my letter in your next show. The show that my letter is about is Honey Badger Radio 33, your first red pill moment. So here goes. I remember my first red pill moment being when I was still a feminist and thinking about a lot of the typical issues that feminists like to use as arguments, such as the wage gap and rape culture. And I remember listening to these claims and thinking that something must be done. But unlike most feminists I seem to witness today, I did not go on and talk about the fact that they existed. I was more concerned about solving these perceived issues. Now, as I started thinking about the steps I would have to take, one of the first things that came into my mind was that I had to know what I was talking about, and I had to care enough about these issues to know them inside out. That meant that the typical feminist claims feminists make, I had to know the research behind it, as knowledge and research are key fundamental cornerstones for expertise of given subject and understanding the issues nature from which you can then form those solutions. As I started doing research, what I found was not what I was expecting. Much to my personal surprise, a lot of the research that I deemed as sufficiently descriptive and accurate was not that at all. It was questionably done science, some even clearly manufactured for a specific viewpoint, and it soon became clear that the beliefs I hold were based on ignorance, lies, and clever manipulation of the narrative. It became clear to me that I could no longer reliably rely on such claims as they were based on questionable research. But at this time, I could not draw any connections further than that. As I spent more time researching, I came across groups of people who had drawn the same conclusions and noticed the same issues within those claims. And there, I was first introduced to the concept of the red pill. I came to understand the social, political, and economic inner workings of society, social interaction, politics, and business. I came to understand that there are a lot of reasons why someone might want to craft untrue narratives, because previously I always thought human beings as nothing more than sincere and pure people. The concept of intentional lying did not even exist in my mind. But there it was, right in front of my eyes. Right in front of my eyes, the very same thing, the very same people I once called as friends being intentionally manipulative and lying in front of everyone to such a degree that is only matched by cluster B dark triad personality types. I came to realize that I was misled much to my own error, and that there was more to the story than I believed. Years go by now, and I've had to understand a lot more of it. The gynocentrism of the human condition and other species, and how much more of the story many are still completely in the dark of. I am no longer a feminist. I consider myself an egalitarian these days. Much of what I once thought feminism represented is actually called egalitarianism, and while I still believe in equality, I now understand that it is much more nuanced than what I once believed. That justice is not just something to be afforded to some groups of people, but to all people, to my fellow men. You matter more than you think, or than you might think you do. You are important, significant, brilliant, and all-around awesome creatures to have on this planet. Never let anyone tell you otherwise, for they don't have any idea what they are talking about. And to the Honey Badger radio crew, Keep up the good work. You guys are really doing humanity a favor by not letting the judgment of the masses define your value and silence you into submission. The path of least resistance is the path of mediocre performance. Step outside the bubble of comfort, and success you will become.
All right, thank you. So this is really doesn't have as much of a question, but maybe Warren, do you have a comment on anything that was read? Just the process of unlearning the feminist stuff that he learned in academia.
Somebody needs to unmute Warren.
I think he has to unmute himself.
No, I got it. Just give me a second. Sorry, there was a significant echo, so go ahead, Warren.
Okay, I had the wisdom of muting myself. I really very much agree with that. I think it's really, and I particularly the part of it where she's talking about the importance of our questioning, having the courage to do questioning and speaking up. And I think particularly, honey badgers is such a crucial voice, because it is largely women's voice, and women's voice is speaking up on these issues. Obviously allows us to really see that this is not a woman versus men's issue. It is something that many women have the wisdom to see that this is a gender liberation issue, and certainly feminism has proven itself to not be about equality, but it's and that is deeply sad.
All right. Okay, I don't see anybody else in the chat, so why don't we go to the next letter? Are you ready? This one is a long one. I apologize. Do you want me to take it, Hannah?
And I'm sorry. I need to leave, Alison, at 7:30 because we haven't had dinner yet, and my wife wants to get to bed on time.
Well, let's see if we can get a letter that's a little bit more applicable to the.
See if I can scroll down through here.
Matt writes, I think. Matt writes.
Yeah, Matt writes.
Okay, go for it.
Matt writes, "Hey there, Badgers. I'm a preschool teacher's aide, the male nurse of academia, working with 2 to 3-year-olds. I use the vocabulary, etc., necessary to communicate with kids of that age, and I do have that silly, goofy personality that little kids love. But I make it a point never to speak down to children. I absolutely hate the condescending, sing-songy voice many adults use. I treat them like I would any adult. It might be doing a puzzle on their own, or a conflict with another kid, but I show them how to identify a problem, think about solutions, and then solve it. I let them know I'm always there if they need help, and I have to step in sometimes, but by the end of the year, the kids can often take care of problems by themselves, or at least try, instead of whining and crying to the teacher as their go-to solution. A mother figure is all most kids get in preschool, so I try to offer something different. By the end, I see a confidence and self-reliance in these kids that I don't know would be there if they were only exposed to mothering they get from the other teachers. Because I'm a man, I often receive criticisms, concerns, and outright objections from parents before the school year even begins. At the end of the year, it's often those same parents that tell me how well I've done my job and how often kids talk about me at home, about the things they say about me. Notably, this happens most often when the child is a boy and the parents express gratitude for being a positive influence on their child. This in turn always gives me a confidence boost. Even if it's just a handful of parents and kids each year, I think I make a difference on a small scale. Thanks for reading and keep on doing what you do. P.S. I hope my paragraph breaks were adequate." I got to say one thing about this. It's a lot bigger than you think. I hope you're listening now, Matt. I honestly, I think one of the biggest crimes against students that has taken place during my lifetime is taking men out of the education system where younger kids are concerned. I went through elementary school and had almost no interaction with male educators, and little interaction with male education administrators. And I saw an environment that was very apron stringy, I guess is the best way to put it, that isn't good for either sex. And there were things that were very different from that environment, from the way things were handled in my home and among my family, that I think were dangerous and damaging to children, really, in the school system, and that being not allowing kids to work things out for themselves, not allowing kids to solve problems for themselves, and not taking a matter-of-fact approach to teaching, not taking a matter-of-fact approach to handling child interactions, but instead having to micromanage the kids. I think that holds them back. And as I got into junior high, just as from the perspective of a student, as I got into junior high and started having male teachers, that made a huge difference for me. My first male teacher gave me a lot more learning freedom, and I had some successes that I don't think I would have had that year because I was ill and I missed half the school year, and half my learning was done at home. And I don't think a female teacher would have been able to handle it as well. It's just something I don't think you realize how much benefit you are to those kids. I mean, don't sell yourself short on that. It is a really big deal that you're there, and it is a really important thing to keep you there.
I really agree with that. I think that there is most men don't know that when they roughhouse with children, for example, they teach children how to sort of speak up about what where to set their boundaries and how to say what they want, what they need, and that is very helpful. That when there's when a child fails, very frequently a female teacher will come in or a mom will come in and try to cushion that failure, prevent that failure from happening to begin with. And a dad and a male teacher are far more likely to sort of use that failure as a tool as a stepping stone to understand that almost all success that's worthwhile requires a likelihood of failure in the process of doing so. And it's a really crucial, and when boys go and girls go from mother-only inner-city homes, very frequently inner-city homes are mother-only, and they go to school systems which are almost all female school systems, and then we wonder why those boys in particular are vulnerable to being seduced by the first male role model that shows them respect, which is a gang leader, and then they get channeled into the wrong course in order to get respect in the wrong way. But the work that this Matt has described him doing in the classroom is so crucial, just encouraging boys and girls to try to solve their own problems, not stepping in too soon. It's a different type of nurturance. Male nurturance and female nurturance, we often call females nurturers, but the type of nurturing that comes with helping a child solve his or her own problems and seeing that they have that confidence, that's a type of nurturance also. And it's one that needs to come into the school system by about an equal number of male and female teachers, especially in inner cities, which are where the homes are dominated by moms. It's so crucial for the inner cities in particular to have male teachers, and not just males who are imitation females, but males who encourage those types of qualities that we just talked about. And that does require educating the parents of younger kids as to the values of bringing males into the classroom. And as you know, in Canada, there's been a study done of why men are afraid to enter into teaching in the early school years. And a huge part of the fear is that 40% of those males responding to that in Canada who were considering going into school teaching in the early years were also fearful of being accused of molesting children, and that fearing that one wrong move, like taking the child on their lap and hugging the child, would misinterpreted by one parent could lead to the end of their career and disgrace. And so that issue really needs to be addressed as well.
Yeah, I remember when my father started keeping his classroom door open all the time because of that fear.
Wow.
And it went from, like, he used to be able to, if a kid was having a rough time, you put your arm around their shoulders and you give them a pep talk.
Mhm.
And it hit a point where you could give the pep talk, but you couldn't put the arm around the shoulders. And I think that's a criminal thing to do to children too, to take that away from them. I don't think people realize how important touch actually is, unless they've maybe been in a family where a premature baby was born and they've gotten to hear from the hospital, your baby will have a better chance of survival if you give your baby skin-to-skin contact. The baby doesn't have an intellectual understanding of that. The baby's not sitting there going, wow, this is nice, I think I'll stick around. It's chemical. And it's a matter of security. And just having somebody, that give you the shoulder squeeze as they're walking past, or pat you on the back, or pat you on the head, or put an arm around your shoulders and say, no, that person was a jerk. You're not stupid for asking that question. That was a good question, or something like that. Makes a huge difference for a developing mind. And it's really unfair that that's been taken away, because we have such a quick to judge and quick to accuse and quick to fear society.
You're so right. And just to validate your point about the premature baby born, Kyle Pruitt at Yale has studied when premature babies have the presence of dad, and they're played with and connected to by their fathers as well as their mothers. They're likely to leave the hospital much sooner. They're likely to have better motor skills at the age of 3 or 4 months when they're exposed to that, and they're likely to develop intelligence at a higher level, IQ at a higher level. This is measurable after 6 months to a year. And so there's really a lot of powerful evidence now being emerging to validate exactly what you just said.
Well, I think any mother would understand that skin contact is really important for a very young child. And the Anna was posting that some Danish comedian posted a photo of himself in a bathtub naked with his 2-year-old, and he got a whole ton of blowback. I remember taking baths. This is when I was old enough to remember, like 4 or 5 years old. Remember me and my older sister, who was 2 years older, taking a bath with my dad, and we were arguing over which one of us was going to wash his back and which was going to wash his chest, because we both wanted to be the ones to wash his chest because his chest had hair on it and that made suds, right? And then you had bubbles, right? And so there's nothing like creepy about it or weird. It was just, we're in the tub with our dad, right? And my dad happens to be Danish, ironically. But, it just, when my son fell ill, he was 9 months old with a bladder infection. The very first thing I did was take off all of his clothes and get myself as unclothed. I was visiting my parents at the time, and get myself as unclothed as was decent in a house full of people, and just lay him on me and just sit in a Pwang chair and bounce with him, right? And just that's just what you do with your child. I mean, just rubbing their back, rubbing their bare back, holding their bare legs, having their arms wrapped around your neck, their face lying on the expanse of skin above the neck of your shirt, right? All of those things soothe a child, right? And comfort them and let them know, that they can smell you, right? They can smell your skin, and it's like, what are we doing? Are we going to put everybody in freaking hazmat suits and tell them, okay, go ahead and raise your child now?
Well, I think what we're
raise them
doing,
all in Skinner boxes. As society is heading towards Skinner box child rearing.
I think what we're ending up doing is by stigmatizing predatory touch, you're going to end up, the only people who are going to touch children are the ones who are predators.
Mhm.
And the children who are starved at touch are going to be that much more vulnerable.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Look at the vulnerability. I don't know if you've seen the movie Spotlight, but one of the little reveals in Spotlight was how the the priests here, the priests are sexually starved, and so you create this sexual void, this touch void that priests are exposed to, and then they take the boys who don't have fathers for the most part, and they see the vulnerability of those boys. And so these sexually starved priests do become predators to these boys who are deprived of father contact. And so you have a perfect a perfect lose-lose situation there.
Yeah, although I would mention that the number of boys who are sexually abused by female juvenile detention staff in a year is greater than the number of boys who've come forward about the Catholic priest pedophile scandals. So I just wanted that.
Yeah. That's a similarly vulnerable population too, though. A lot of boys who end up in juvenile detention facilities come from fatherless homes.
Yes, exactly. But it's very interesting what you're saying about the flip half of that, which is the females who are in the authority position are also taking advantage of that, and those females have not been as sexually deprived as priests by definition were. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, they haven't been sexually deprived, and they're also not being held accountable in the way that pedophile priests have been. Or it's, like any woman in a position of authority over a boy who takes advantage of him. Mary Kay Letourneau. There've been numerous ones. There was one I saw posted on the men's rights subreddit today. She got a 35-year sentence for grooming and seducing underage boys, but it was a suspended sentence. Can you imagine, how on earth can a 35-year sentence be a suspended sentence where, yeah, I'm going to sentence you to 35 years, but you don't have to go to jail?
Yes, so that way it can get recorded as a sentence of 35 years and not seem like a lack of equality.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what it is, and it's absolutely obscene. That you just do not see. People do not see, oh God, who was it? Was it Chris Brown or Kanye? I think it was Chris Brown, right? He came out a couple of years ago and said that he lost his virginity at age 8, right? And he was proud of it. Like, he was, to an older girl, a teenage girl, and he was, I was the man, and that was when I became a man, and all of this stuff, right? And this is the guy who beat up Rihanna. I can't imagine Rihanna was just like, asking, can we change the radio station in the car before that beating happened? I can't imagine that was what was going on. I think that there was probably other things, other conflict going on, but he really laid into her. He went to town on her. She was all banged up, and there's nobody questioning that maybe the experience of an 8-year-old boy who's initiated at age 8 into manhood by a girl twice his age, right? Mm-hmm. That might leave some kind of mark on him, mm-hmm. Some kind of, there might be some psychological consequences to that long term, right? And he doesn't think so, right? Boys often don't think so. Boys often see it, they talk themselves into seeing it as, a good thing, a positive thing, a rite of passage, consensual, I was the one who seduced her, blah, 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 right? They don't see it because they're being groomed. They're being groomed, and when people are being groomed, that's the whole point. When you're grooming someone over time, they think that they're consenting.
Okay, I just wanted to give Warren the opportunity to drop out if he needs to.
Thank you. I just wanted to say goodbye, and I just love this group, and I'm looking very forward to doing more with you. And but I also want to make sure I help with dinner and get and we get to bed in time. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you for coming back on, Warren. You always you always bring a great quality to the show when you come on.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you, Warren.
Thank you. So
Thanks, Warren. Have a good dinner.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Bye bye.
All right. Let's
I wanted to point out something else about the difference between responses regarding the Danish man and the women guards, women staffers. It wasn't necessarily all guards, but women staffers in prisons. This is something from just the little bit I've read. This is something that's happening in these juvenile detention facilities. It's happening in broad daylight. And it's happening in common areas of the facilities like libraries and classrooms and stuff like that. So they're so bold about it that it is, here they're actually doing something predatory. They're actually engaging in non-platonic touch. They're actually sexually abusing, sexually exploiting minors, and they're confident enough at not being judged for it, not being called on the carpet for it, that they're doing it in areas where they are at greater risk for being caught. And here we have, this picture of this guy parenting his child, and because people cannot see non-romantic touch in touching a child, they can't see a platonic anything anymore, even where it is, he gets demonized. How bad? Like, we have this huge stretch between, everything women do is acceptable, and men are dirty. That a man's touch can't even be seen as platonic, and a woman's predatory touch, she can be confident enough to do it when she might get caught and not worry that it's going to be seen as predatory. And from what was it, Professor Adele Mercier, right? Her explanation for how this happens in Canada was such that it pretty much proved that confidence is merited. They have the right, or not a right, but ability to be confident like that, because people will make excuses for them.
I want to jump in real quick. Now that Warren Farrell is gone, oh man, he's so scary. I mean, I can really understand why we would need an army of people with, loud noises and fire alarms and shouting and saliva and police to protect us from him, because he's so intense.
Oh yeah, no.
The articulate, soft-spoken man. How terrible.
No.
He's got the eyes of a chipmunk too. He's well, not like a chipmunk, but he's got the eyes of like a very, very soft kind of teddy bear kind of person. I just wanted to say I'm surprised that we haven't started to require men to change diapers without actually removing them. Right? To change kids' diapers without actually removing them. Because that seems to be where this is going.
Or simply telling men they can't change diapers and then criticizing them for not doing it.
Okay. I don't know how you would change a diaper. What, don't you have to remove a diaper to change it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's how absurd it's getting, is that we're going to demand that men change diapers without removing them, because if
right,
diaper, right. The kids' genitals are exposed, and then you have to touch them, with a cloth, right? And you might have to tuck the little penis down when you put the new diaper on, and oh my God, that's disgusting. It's disgusting.
All right, let's during the Cologne episode, this segue is total shit. It's almost as bad as my Berlin Wall faux pas today.
It was. She said, that wall in in Berlin, that wall. What's it called? The one in Berlin. And I'm like, the Berlin Wall, and she's like, oh yeah.
And this is why we love you, Alison.
Oh, but anyway, so in the Cologne thing, that we did, Anna made a statement that people seem to take offense at. So I'm going to give her the opportunity to clarify what it was about. Yeah, so go ahead, Anna.
Thank you, Alison. The segue was kind of veered away from what Karen was saying about one of the rappers or whatever who had an experience at 8 years old, right, which is younger than Aisha, and because that seems to be the whole big issue directed at me, even though Karen and I both waded in on that, but because I did not reveal my context, I was taken out of the entire context and demonized for something that I have kind of a personal experience with. And unlike the grooming situation, my issue or my experience was with kind of a neighbor type situation. So it wasn't somebody close to me. It wasn't a family member. It wasn't anyone that I even saw more than once every 2 to 3 months or so. And what happened was this much older man, and I was younger than 9 myself, much younger, around 6 or 7, I think. And, well, actually, to preface that, when I was 5, I remember looking up a girl's skirt. So that's, I guess, when the sexual curiosity started, and it was a kindergarten girl there with me. But whenever my family found out what happened, they nearly killed this man by beating him. They nearly beat a man to death for something that I continued on. And until it got uncomfortable for me, and then I stopped and I threw dirt in his general direction and ran away and told my family later. But before then, I very directly remember feeling very powerful and desirable and interested in this whole situation where I had a grown man, a community leader, on his knees trying to take a peek at my panties. And I loved it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I continued this sort of situation until it got uncomfortable, and then I stopped. Now, obviously, adults need to know how to handle precocious children, how to handle, someone who clearly should not be doing what they're doing. But because we're not talking about it, it is such a taboo subject about kids having sexual curiosity at all. Everybody instantly gets labeled a pedophile just for thinking about it, which is a biological fact. Children are curious about sex as early as the age of 3. And because we're not aware of that, adults don't know how to deal with it. They end up in shitty situations. It ends up being confusing for adults, for children, for everyone involved. And I was coming from that perspective of it is not 100,000,000% always the man's fault when they don't know how to deal with a precocious child. They're confused, they don't know what's happening, and the child in question is continuing this behavior because they like it and they're enjoying it. And I clearly remember enjoying it and liking it until I didn't, and then I stopped. But you cannot deny the feeling of power and just like, oh my God, I literally brought this grown man to his knees. And actually, the question in chat, here we go. I don't actually remember if I initiated or not, but I do remember he was a gardening fellow person who was had a garden plot next to my grandparents. And me and a friend would go over there, and he'd like pick us cherries because he was like really, really good at growing stuff, and he'd pick us like berries and other things. And once he was like up picking something off the tree, and he was wearing these really baggy shorts. And I remember looking up and seeing something strange and wrinkly and like round and odd. And I remember being curious about that. And I remember paying attention to when my grandpa was undressing to be like, what is going on over there? It was legitimate sexual curiosity. And because we don't talk about it, people don't know how to deal with it. And we end up with really fucked up situations.
And I can agree that it is important that we make this not a taboo subject to talk about because of the vulnerability of children. And this is a situation where I can also speak to this from experience. My experience was not with an adult. It was with a child who was older than me, much older than me. And I can't honestly remember if my 5th birthday happened before or after it started. Can't remember even how it started. I remember a lot of other things. And one of the things that it took me a long time to get a handle on was how very difficult it is to identify when you're being abused under a circumstance like that as a child. It's not the same as if somebody comes along and beats on you. It's not the same as if you're at the park and a bully comes over and starts picking on you. That's very clear and obvious, and you know that you're a victim when that happens, and you know that that's something that you're entitled to object to and do something about. You know the other person's in the wrong, even when you're 5. But when you're dealing with someone, like my situation was with someone I viewed as a caregiver and a somebody I loved. This was a family member, essentially. Not biological, but still family. He was a foster child, and he was a foster child because he had been severely abused. I remember feeling scar tissue on his head, not on his skin, but bumps on his scalp from where his mother had beat him with a metal ball bat. And so this was someone who had treated me as a confidant. That blurs a lot of things for a child. And so when I was uncomfortable and I was afraid and didn't like what was happening, I couldn't put my finger on why. I couldn't explain what was wrong. And I had somebody telling me it wasn't wrong. That this was, since it felt good, it must be fun, And this is how grooming happens. And it's not necessarily, excusing of the behavior, that he had been abused, that he had gone through these things, and he was brain damaged. But because it was and is a taboo subject, I was vulnerable. I'd been talked to about my privacy, and I'd been talked to about stranger danger, but it's an uncomfortable thing for adults to flat out teach a child, you can be at risk for this thing. And it keeps children vulnerable when we don't talk to them. It keeps children vulnerable when we don't talk to adults. And when you're dealing with somebody who actually is a pedophile, it keeps children vulnerable when we can't look at pedophilia as something that needs to be addressed rather than something that needs to be condemned and then forgotten about. We have to be able to look at this as a handicap the same way that we look at, say, my asthma as a handicap. If we decided, for instance, that my asthma was immoral because it might kill me, and we can't talk about it, then we can't talk about what to do to counter the symptoms. And we can't talk about what to do to counter the symptoms in the disorder that causes pedophilia, then we leave the sickness unchanged, and we leave the sick in a position where they're more likely to perpetrate. And the thing that sucks about being a kid in that position, it's like you don't know to go to somebody. You don't know to say, I have been hurt, because you don't understand what has happened to you. You don't know to describe to the adults that you're in trouble, that you're in a dangerous situation, because it doesn't feel, even though it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel dangerous in the same way it feels dangerous when somebody comes at you with a fist raised. And you've got your perpetrator, your abuser, telling you people won't understand, you can't tell anybody, you can't talk about this, and you learn behaviors that accommodate the abuse. And the worst thing about it for me was those behaviors that I learned to accommodate that abuse, those don't go away. Once you have been taught to hide when you're being abused, once you have been taught that you're going to get judged for being abused, You learn to not talk about it the next time, and the next time, and the time after that. And because of that, I didn't talk the next time I was abused. And my next abuser almost caused me to commit suicide. I was 13 years old, and I swallowed an entire bottle of medicine that I thought was going to kill me. And of course, it made me sick before it didn't kill me. I threw up all over the bathroom, and I had to clean it all up because I was home alone. I didn't want to do it when my parents were home, And the thing that actually kept me from trying again was how horrible it was while I was still sick and I was still throwing up, trying to clean up all that puke. And I realized if I had succeeded, my family would have come home to find me dead on the bathroom floor, laying in a puddle of my own vomit, and had to clean that up. They would have had to make the phone calls, and they would have had to tell all my friends and my teachers and my other family members, their extended family members. And I realized all of the things they were going to have to do if I did that to myself. And I couldn't do that to everybody else. And so for a little over a year, I endured repeated abuse that was so bizarre, and I'm not going to try to describe it other than to say that it was weird enough that in between times when it wasn't happening, I could convince myself that I just had a nightmare. It wasn't real. It didn't happen to me until the next time, and then I would realize it had. And it took me almost a year and a half to put a stop to it. And when I did, I almost killed the person who was abusing me. And so when I get told, and I've had a number of pedophiles contact me on Twitter to try to tell me that because I wasn't overtly physically damaged, I didn't get ripped, I didn't get bruised, or I wasn't desperately scared and crying the whole time I was being abused as a young child, that I wasn't injured, and that if I enjoyed the physical sensation of it, that I consented. And that's bullshit. I didn't consent to being changed that way. I didn't consent to not ever being able to say I'm a virgin and understand what it meant. These are things that happen because we don't talk about these things. We don't acknowledge that children can be vulnerable because of their naivety, their lack of understanding, and their inability to understand what the adult or the older child is doing to them. We have crippled our ability to address pedophilia, and we have crippled our ability to protect children from it. And we have crippled our ability to protect precocious children. And I went on to go through a whole period of time, just as researchers have found with abused boys. Sexual promiscuity is one of the symptoms that comes out in children who have been abused as they get older, when they go through their adolescent years and such. And I went through that, and I did some really stupid stuff, to where I'm again lucky to be alive. These are all things that, because we can't talk about them and we can't acknowledge them, we can't give voice to the agency and lack of agency, the combination that children experience. We leave kids vulnerable to going through the things that I put myself through as I was growing up. If I'd have been able to talk to somebody who I could trust to not kill the person that was abusing me when I was 5, I might never have gone through any of the rest of that stuff. I wouldn't have gone through a suicide attempt. And I wouldn't have had to contemplate what it would be like for my parents to find my dead body while I cleaned up my own puke all over their bathroom. You know, if somebody could have, if the boy could have talked about his feelings and what he was going through, if he could have told someone that he was attracted to children and needed help without fear that instead of helping him, that they would hurt him for it, he might not have done what he did to me. And this is why we have to be able to talk to this stuff. We have to be able to talk about this stuff without making judgment our only response.
All right. Well, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Hannah. I think let's lighten the mood up. Let's take a freaking letter. I'll read this one. The man with varied taste in music writes, "Hello. I started down the whole anti-social justice warrior through certain somewhat popular commentators such as Sargon of Akkad, Teal Deer, and a name I am not going to pronounce, sounds Strix Hexenhammer 666, which I respect at the time, which I respect the time and effort they put into their content. I've seen this information, however, and I've seen it in academia, how far down the rabbit hole we've gone. But I find it hard to engage in these subjects with people that I know, especially if they have differing opinions, because while I'm outspoken about what I believe, I have my mannerisms which stifle me from really getting to where I want to go. Now that all that intro jibber-jabber is out of the way, I'll tell you first about an event which I managed to skip, but would provide you with some possible future content if you so choose to engage in it, as well as a more recent event which I'd like to share." He links to a series of presentations at, I think, the Stony Brook University in U.S., which is where Naomi Wolf is situated. Because Naomi Wolf is, in good standing with feminist academia, but Warren Farrell isn't. The presentation, and Warren Farrell isn't in good standing with feminist academia because he invited women to experience all the wonders of being empowered as a man, and they didn't like that. The presentation was mandatory for all new and transfer students. They had people crowded into the LaVille Stadium in order to set up for the event due to the sheer volume of students coming in. I managed to avoid the event because my mom and stepdad were having a wedding reception. I had to gloss over the contents in an orientation makeup where they posted the presentations online, and I had to fill a questionnaire with 100% accuracy in order not to have a hold on my account for the next semester. The videos were available for download, so I decided to post them here to allow you to take a look at them at your own pace. One thing I regretfully say is that Naomi Wolf headquarters is currently the Stony Brook University. In an attempt to challenge my own preconception on how I see feminists and to ensure that I am honest with myself and my own ideas and beliefs, I decided to attend the workshop she was hosting and try to be as open as possible to how I perceive feminists. I admit that I garnered animosity towards feminists hearing about the lies and manipulation that they have been putting out, even though I'm not directly affected by the issue, which is an issue with my character that I recognize and I wanted to attempt to address. I tried to be fair, however, and I felt like the best way to address this was by talking to them as if they're ordinary people. Now for how the event went. Most of my commentary is in retrospect. Initially by one of the other attendees, which there were about 15, I was told that she likes to drag people into the whole production, and that I play a part in the whole process of it. Turns out it was toward the end of the cycle in which it was broken down to 3 parts during 3 separate dates, in which I was only able to attend part of the workshop about... Guys, try to be careful with the run-on sentences, in which there was an intermission in between them. But she ended up doing all she ended up doing was making all the people who did go through the whole shebang feel good or something. I couldn't contribute a whole lot to the workshop, even though I tried to make my best to interact and invite discussion, even though I was not sure about the specifics, which there was some sort of a focus on. When they were doing a break, and I told her I was there, and I told her I was contrary, and brought up points regarding some issues I have, mostly the discontinuity of the whole darn thing. In other words, I believe he was complaining about how confusing it was. I think the confusing is a tactic, actually. She appeared receptive, but not engaged in who I was and what I had to say. The more I look back, the more I see how ignored I really was, even though I built up what I had as I went, and I had a receptive and active attitude throughout the whole demonstration. All the women there, however, were given all the attention and needed for free while I tried to communicate and got nothing in return. Have you guys seen other situations like this regarding this kind of attitude, or am I just making a mountain out of molehill and being an entitled dipshit? So that's about it. I also included some music for you guys to check out, which you can enjoy after downloading. Thank you for your time, and have a good day.
Huh.
This was the man with varied taste in music.
Okay.
And his taste in music is indeed varied.
I just want to throw in there, I didn't realize that Naomi Wolf's headquarters was a university. I was fairly certain it was either like a moon base or maybe a hollowed-out volcano, submarine, nuclear, something like that.
Yeah. No, I always thought it was actually like an ice cave.
Yeah. Oh.
Cool.
Yeah, I was thinking it was like a ziggurat, like in the middle of the Amazon, where she can roll the heads of any men that dare step in and try to mansplain. You know.
Just rolling down the steps. Just chop them
rolling down the steps.
Rolling down the steps, yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was ground zero of
right.
9/11.
Okay, so do we have any actual commentary aside from insinuating that Naomi Wolf lives in a villain's lair and probably has, sharks?
With freaking laser beams attached to their freaking heads.
Yeah, okay, which actually would make her so much cooler.
Oh, God, yeah. She would be so much less kindergarten teacher and so much more,
She's going to demand 1 million rights.
No. She's going to demand $3 million. Oh, wait, no, that's her net worth. When she told me she wasn't wealthy, that was her net worth, $3 million. So.
By the way, did you want this person to say hi for you?
Yes, actually, just give her my kindest regards. Just tell her Karen Straughan wishes to send her kindest regards to you. Don't be mean. Just put on the most pleasant face you can. Be like, you remember the show Little House on the Prairie, right? There was Nellie fucking whatever her name was, and she was just like the biggest spoiled brat out there, and she had this way of smiling in this really, really fake way at people and being very, very polite. Yeah, do that. Smile at her very politely, that kind of unctuous, oily politeness that she exudes, and just tell her that, oh, by the way, Karen Straughan sends her kindest regards.
And I send my kindest regards to Hannah.
You send your kindest regards to me.
Oh, wait. I guess not, but not in a slimy or unctuous way. in the opposite of that.
Definitely way. Oily, though. Oily, Alison.
Yeah, so, I fall down and then I just sort of slide for a few feet because I'm so oily.
So this one's a little bit stretching, but basically that means you're both sending your regards a Broad's way.
God. Hannah!
I
had to do something.
God, send my regards a Broad's way.
Alright, could we just take the next letter?
Yes, do it.
Yeah, we can do that. Mr. 0303 writes, "Hi Badgers. I'm a bit late to the party, but below is my red pill moment. It is not particularly dramatic or interesting, but it may show some trends worth discussing. When I started high school, our German teacher constantly spewed rhetoric of how boys are stupid and girls are perfect about everything, or at everything. It is worth mentioning that the girl-to-boy ratio was 2-to-1. On one such occasion, my geek pride was hurt too much, and I pointed out to her that boys can't be that stupid if I have the highest score in the class. She had a really sour expression at the time. It was obvious she wasn't used to being contradicted. From there on, she took small jabs at me, but I didn't really notice. I was there to learn and thought those are just her quirks. This mini war escalated when I corrected a mistake she made in front of the entire class. I was dumb, I know. A few days later, there was a parent meeting, and she told my mother that I hate girls and that I'm a sociopath. When my mother returned home, we had a horrific argument and didn't talk to each other for 3 days. I couldn't grasp the fact that my own mother, who knew me all my life, would believe such a thing. I couldn't believe that an adult, a teacher, and a professional would lie in such a manner. Then my father came to me and suggested that from now on he should be going to the parent meetings. He realized that the system can be corrupt and restored balance in our family. I never heard that teacher's petty complaints again in our house. Eventually, my mother also saw that the teacher in question is not objective and unprofessional. I needed to retaliate to this attack on my character, and I did so the only way I knew how, with academic excellence. I doubled my effort. I considered a 97% score a failure. I took every optional course that was available and I aced it. I made the teacher livid. One time she called me evil in front of the entire class. At that point, I was immune to these petty jabs and just continued to ruin her credibility with my own actions. I was better than her pet girls, and that was blatantly obvious. Then I experienced something I never felt before. Despite being a nerd, the boys in my class respected me. The jock, the class clown, the goth, everyone treated me like a friend. I essentially took every bullet the teacher threw at men and stood up to authority. After 2 years, she went into early retirement before I graduated. Years later, Gamergate happened and I was introduced to all you wonderful people, but that initial experience taught me to question authority and to not believe a narrative. Apologies for the long email. Badgeron, regards, Mr. 0303. Just for the record, that's not that long. We had longer ones today, so nothing to apologize for. Even if it had been longer, nothing to apologize for. But I want to point out how particularly masculine that approach was. Girls when they get into a war like that, they get petty. And they get petty right back, and they're likely to go to authority, and they make accusations, and they cry for help, and they pretty much use relational aggression as their means to combat. And here we have a student who was subject to basically an abusive attitude by his teacher, and his response was to prove her wrong by striving for excellence. I will be the thing that you say I'm not capable of. I absolutely love that. The highest of kudos for that.
No, I would agree. It's a very masculine approach, and it's like, like I had something similar happen. I had a social studies teacher in grade 11 who uses 20% latitude for attitude, right? So he could mark you up or down 20% just based on your attitude, and he used that to put me from a marginally passing grade to a failing grade. The reason why I had a marginally passing grade was because the very first, this is grade 11, mind you, the very first assignment that he gave that required marks was to find a newspaper clipping or draw a picture that he could post on the classroom wall, that would be interesting. And I was just like, how is that even worth my time, right? It's not even, I'm not learning anything. I'm just, I'm gonna cut a page of the newspaper out, or I'm gonna draw a picture of a flower. What? Is this grade 3 or is this grade 11, right? And I went on and I took a correspondence course, and without the intervention and assistance of a teacher, I managed to get 98% in the course, right? Because I had to complete it to get my diploma, right? So I took it by correspondence and got a 98% in the course. And he knew that. He knew that I had done that. He knew that I had gone from a class where I had a bad attitude and I embarrassed him frequently by asking him questions that he didn't have answers to. And I went on and I aced the course, right? the teacher that I most liked in my entire high school experience was one who he didn't really he didn't tell us what to think. He acted. He was an English teacher in grade 12. He looked like Phineas Freak from the Freak Brothers comics. And he essentially acted as a moderator. So he would bring up a discussion point. He would ask the class to discuss, and he would simply act as a moderator, calling on people, calling on you, now, okay, yeah, you can refute that, whatever, right? He acted as a fair and impartial moderator, and he liked me. He really liked me. I liked him because of the way he taught. He really liked me because I challenged some of his preconceived notions about how things. He was very, very sort of. He had some very idealistic. He was very idealistic, and I challenged him from a point of from a perspective of pragmatism, right? Well, how practical is that in the real world? And he often had to sort of concede, well, okay, yeah, no, you might be right. And I loved that he was able to be challenged like that, unlike my social studies teacher the year before. My social studies teacher the year before would brook no disagreement with his political views, right? He should not have been teaching social studies at all, considering that he was locked into a political ideology. And this guy was a wonderful teacher, and the only reason why he was a wonderful teacher, in my opinion, was because he was fair, he was balanced, and he was willing to take a second look at his dearly held beliefs.
All right. So I just want to say something really quick, and I'm going to cede the floor to Brian. This is why the wage gap, feminists. Because when a boy encounters a sexist teacher, he works harder to prove to her that he is better than that. When a girl, I remember one particular woman told me about how she had a sexist guidance counselor who said, you can't take math because you're a girl. Well, if you had his attitude, you would have just received, there's no Nobel Prize for mathematics, but maybe Nobel Prize for pure physics or something. Because you would have used his attitude to inspire yourself, to make him eat crow, which is what this boy did. And because he approached this from a male way, a masculine way, or even maybe it isn't even a masculine way, it's just the way that you expect an agent to approach that, because he looked at it in terms of his own actions, rather than how he was a victim of the teacher. Whereas a woman in the same circumstance, or a girl in the same circumstance, what does she do? Oh, I'm a victim of a sexist teacher. I gotta complain to someone, or I just have to give up. This is why the greater rate of achievement, or at least on the higher levels, and the greater wage gap. Because when men encounter a problem, they work harder. When women encounter a problem, they whine about an injustice and try to find someone to make the thing fair. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
All right. A couple of things. Okay, first of all, kudos to you for not allowing what this teacher did or attempted to do, or the students, to get in the way of what you wanted, and going out there and just achieving and chasing, whatever your goals were, and just being the realizing your potential and not letting these sexist attitudes, because that's what they are, let's call them what they are, impede that progress. Secondly, very, very, very big kudos to your dad for going up there and saying, I'm going to go with you to these, to these student teacher conference things, because, it's. I think that he just deserves a lot of credit for doing that. Also, I would ask the question. After I'm done, you guys can speak on it. But I wouldn't be surprised if the fact that his father was there was one of the main reasons why he was able to take that stand and stand up and do the thing, go out there and do the damn thing and be and realize his potential because he had a supportive father. And I'm kind of upset that the mom, who he points out in his letter, had known him for his whole life and yet kind of like bought into that shit. And I mean, I don't know their situation and all that, but that seems really kind of shitty. And what a cunt that teacher is. That is so incredibly low. And I know that I'm not making an argument. I'm just calling her a cunt because that's what she is. But that is a very cunty thing to do. And it just goes to show, it's just one example of many of how, you know, fucking corrupt our school system is. So kudos to the dad, kudos to the boy, and also, you know, more people, you know, guys, if you're watching this, this is why I think more people standing up and speaking out and, you know, just like don't let the shame and the guilt and all the bullshit that they're trying to like put on you to keep you from, you know, realizing who you are and being true to yourself get in the way, because this guy hasn't really tasted, from what I can tell, any of the repercussions that you would have expected. And I think that more and more people do it, then, you know, it's going to be harder for them to bite back. So good on you, Dad, and, you know, and moms, to pay attention, because your boys, they need you, and they need you to like stick up for them, or more shit like this is going to happen. Okay, that's it. I'm done.
And they don't. The boys don't need their moms to stick up for them because, you know, the boy walked up to the front of the class and spit in the teacher's shoe. That is not an appropriate reason for a mom to stick up for her boy, right? When he gets sent home from school early over doing something like that, right? But there are absolutely 100% reasons why moms need to stick up for their boys, and so many of them just they don't see the casual sort of slights that teachers, you know, have for boys, female teachers particularly have for boys, the casual discrimination, the casual, we're going to call on a girl this time, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time, and all of the negative attention that boys get in school. Do
you think that the boy having a father helped him have the ability to do that?
Absolutely.
To get up and walk? I think so too. I think that he learned that from his, you know, that like don't take shit attitude. I think he got it from his dad.
Let's get Hannah in here, because she's a... Oh, okay, right.
Well, part of what I was going to say, Karen also said. So I mean, it got said anyway. So that's good. But I wanted to point out, I want to relate this to the overprescription of drugs for the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, I'm not going to say the disorder doesn't exist, because that would be bullshit. I know people that have it, and I've seen their struggles, and I understand that it is a real thing, and it is hard to live with, hard to deal with, and hard to go through school with. But every little boy who acts like a little boy doesn't have attention deficit disorder because he's acting like a little boy. And unfortunately, especially in the United States, our school system has a tendency to play doctor with our children, and in particular, our little boys. And South Park did a really great episode on this. I remember in particular one line from it where one of the mothers said to one of the other mothers, "I just don't understand what's wrong with my son." You know, something to the effect of, "I just don't understand what's wrong with my son. He keeps running around. He has no attention span. He keeps acting like a little 8-year-old." And the boy says, "Mom, I am 8." And it's that expectation of not being children while they're in school because they have learning to do, and this treatment of boys as if they are defective human beings that should have been more like girls, that needs to be stopped. And it does take both parents standing up for the child under that circumstance. When you have a mom complying with a school that says go to your doctor and get Ritalin, not, your child might have a problem. I recommend that you get him checked out to make sure that he's okay. but go to your doctor and get Ritalin or you can't be in the classroom. This is an instance when we really need to be standing up for our children, because they're basically inflicting a drug on a child for a number of years because they don't want to have to do their jobs. That's something that's very dangerous.
Have you ever noticed, Hannah, that a lot of male feminists and social justice warrior types tend to approach issues in a very passive-aggressive way? Like, in a very roundabout, there's a lot of smugness, there's a lot of sniping, use of
Snark.
Yeah, like snark, but never really direct, never really forward. They just kind of they use this sort of playful language. It gives them, it's very slimy and slippery. It gives them an out, and say, oh, I'm just joking, or it's just satire, or whatever.
Yeah.
But they're never direct, and actually, I mean, for me, it smacks of being anti-masculine, or definitely not the way that guys are used to, that I know, and maybe it's because I'm more urban, but in the neighborhoods and the way that I grew up. We're direct with each other. We say what we mean. When we have an opinion about something, we just put it out there. There's no dancing around it. There's no, I don't know. It's kind of this very manipulative way of engaging in conversation.
One of the interesting things, just on the topic of Ritalin and teachers wanting to push your kids to take it and stuff, because I have a very sort of unusual experience with that. My oldest is a boy. He was always very quiet, very, very able to sit still, able to do to not necessarily focus on task, but when he. Why are you unmuting my microphone when it's unmuted, Alison?
I'm trying to figure out how you're managing to speak through a mute.
Get your fingers off of the fuck. Oh my god. Anyhow.
You can't stop the Karen tank. It's
my
rolling.
Boy.
How did you do that?
I don't know. My boy was he was not compliant. Okay? He was not compliant. The teacher would assign a task, he wouldn't do it, but he wouldn't disrupt anything. He wouldn't be disrupting anyone. He would just be quietly pretending his eraser was a spaceship, and he'd be doing his own thing, right? And so he just kind of got lost in the shuffle because he was not disrupting the class, right? And, in elementary school, he did fine, but he did not do as well as he could have done because the teacher just was not aware that he was not on task, right? My daughter, on the other hand, was a fucking catastrophe for that school, right? She was, and they had the exact same problem. They had hyperlexia, right? Both of them, right? So they were both reading before they were 2. They were both doing math, at just after, just briefly, just shortly after they hit their 2nd birthday. Nobody taught them any of this, right? They just picked it up. And my daughter was extremely gifted. Taught herself to read music, taught herself to, she was doing math at a grade 5 level in kindergarten, right? All of this stuff, right? So, I mean, she was the real freak of our family and was completely nonverbal when we put her in school. We put her in kindergarten at age 4. We were like, okay, what are we going to do? We have a kid who can read. We have a kid who can do math. We have a kid who can do all of this stuff. Are we going to keep her out for another year? Right? Or are we going to just throw her in and expect her to learn how to fucking talk? Right? And she learned how to talk within about 3 weeks, which is kind of amazing, right? But I had teachers, because she was such a problem, because she was such a disruption, because she was so into things, right? So she was the escape artist when she was 2 years old. I couldn't sit on the fucking toilet for 5 minutes without her breaking the baby gate, pulling it out of the way, bumping her ass down the stairs, right? Just tripping the deadbolt, opening the door, right? She's standing on the edge of the stairs on the landing and wiggling the door to work the chain lock loose. And by the time I hear the screeching tires out on the street in front of my house, I'm running down the stairs, pulling up my pants, right? Because she's gotten out in the 3 minutes that it took me to like freaking take a dump, right? She's escaped the fucking house. She's escaped all of the fucking shit. She's been a total Houdini. That's what my daughter was like, right? And so I had a constant barrage of, you need to take her and get her diagnosed. You need to get her diagnosed so we can free up funding for her learning assistance, blah, 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 for all these extra measures that she needs, right? And I took her into a pediatrician who sat with her for 15 minutes, right, in a doctor's office, right? This is a totally new environment for a kid who gets into everything, right? Who will take apart the telephone, right, just to see what's inside it. And he says to me, she has the worst case of ADHD I've ever seen, right? Because she's taking out the fucking tongue depressors and she's getting into the cupboard and she's like handling the speculum and she's looking down the end of it and, and all of this stuff. She's getting into all of everything in the exam room, right? And he's just like, she has the worst case of ADHD I've ever seen, right? So I go to the teachers and I say, well, the pediatrician says she has the worst case of ADHD he's ever seen. And they all laughed because they were like, no, she doesn't, right? She absolutely doesn't. She's severely autistic. So then she has a psych ed test, sits down for 8 hours with a psychologist. The psychologist says, I don't know what the fuck is wrong with your daughter, but she's not on the autism spectrum because you know what? She talks to me as if she's talking to an adult. She talks to a younger child as if she's talking to a baby. She talks to a peer as if she's talking to a peer. And she not only understands sarcasm, but she harnesses it beautifully, right? Like there's no way she's on the spectrum. She can't be, right? I still had teachers all the way up to grade 10 trying to slap a sticker on her, right? To free up funding for help she didn't need, right? She graduated with honors. She graduated with fucking honors. She got awards in high school. She got most improved student, top student in science, top student in English, right? For a kid who couldn't talk in kindergarten, right? Top student in English in grade freaking 9, right? Like, and they were all slap a sticker on your daughter. She doesn't behave the way we expect her to behave, right?
My parents had it with me when I was a kid. She doesn't behave the way she's expected to behave. Something must be wrong with her. And had Asperger's existed as a diagnosis when I was really young, I might have had a diagnosis. But instead, when they took me to a shrink, then the shrink said, oh no, she's just learning fast for her age right now, and the other kids will catch up with her, and and she'll be normal. Well, he was wrong about the normal part. I never turned out normal and everything. But I want to thank you, Karen, for talking about your daughter taking the phone apart, because I got in trouble for that, huge trouble for that when I was a kid. My mother thought it might have had the potential to electrocute me, so she went that route, and had a fit about it. And then, of course, my dad just went with, it would have been expensive to replace if we couldn't have put it back together. And I had that same problem in school with kids, or with teachers not understanding when I was curious about things, and wanting to read the instructional books, wanting to read not they would have a little bookshelves full of fiction and stuff like that. Instead of a school library, every classroom had books in it besides the textbooks that you had for your studies, and I would read those and everything, but then I would go grab the encyclopedias because the encyclopedias had cooler stuff in them. And I had the first elementary school that I went to had really good teachers, and they were excited about it. And I had one teacher that was, encouraging me to, where the other kids were doing show and tell, I sort of made up research paper type formats and brought in information and told the kids all about this kind of dinosaur or that kind of dinosaur and stuff like that. And then I went to a more normal school when that one got closed down. And all of a sudden, that stuff was, it was like verboten. Something's wrong with this child. She wants to read the encyclopedia, and instead of bringing in what she found in the lake on vacation for show and tell, she brought in a piece of paper and is reading to these children, all these other children, all about the way they do this thing in this other country that we do in our country differently, and she's citing sources and then something's wrong, and I got treated like I was abnormal for it instead of encouraged. And I think if I had been a boy, the first approach of those teachers that just went with, oh, something's wrong, would have been, get this child on Ritalin. He's got attention deficit disorder. Because I didn't do what they told. Like, I did all that, but I didn't do my homework. And I didn't sit still in class, unless I was reading a book.
My daughter
I didn't keep my mouth shut.
My daughter always did her homework, but she never did it at home. She always did it in class because she was always done the classwork in plenty of time to do the homework in class, right? And so, I mean, like, you literally have a kid who has no academic problems whatsoever, right? We changed schools. We changed school systems, right? So we moved from British Columbia to Alberta 6 weeks before the end of the school year, in grade 9, when she was in grade 9. And in BC, you only have to take French up to grade 6. In Alberta, you have to take it up to grade 9. So she had to have a credit for French at the end of grade 9 to be able to move on to high school. So she had to take a French course. So she had to take an entire 3 years of French in 6 weeks. And after not having had any instruction in French for over 2 years, right? And she, and her teacher was just like, I really admire your daughter because she has absolutely no problem putting up her hand and asking a stupid question. Absolutely no problem. She seems to have no problem,
Karen?
asking. And her English teacher in grade 9 said, your daughter is one of the most gifted students in written English that I've ever seen. And this is a kid who couldn't speak in kindergarten. Everybody was freaking out that the window on language would close without her being able to speak. She would end up like Nell, that Jodie Foster movie, right? She would end up like that. And no, she picked it up in a few weeks. And they
Okay, Karen.
They wanted a diagnosis.
Take this
right?
back to feminism and academia.
But they wanted a diagnosis, okay? Because the moment you slap a sticker on a kid, the provincial government gives you funding for that to deal with it, right? And so if you can say this kid has ADHD, right, the provincial government gives the school more money.
All right, that sounds like it does sound like it's you would find feminists sniffing around that particular logic. But let's get to Theron has a bunch of questions. And I'm afraid we might never have time to get to.
Did you want to address the question that Brian asked? Because he was talking.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. When I was talking about before about the behavior of male feminists and SJWs, and I know it's like it doesn't sound related, but the reason why I brought it up was because I think my main point is I wonder if the way that male feminists make arguments now, in the context of what I'm talking about, could be the symptom of the feminized education system, because a lot of times these guys they're educated. Like they go on a university and they've gotten their journalism degrees and their liberal arts degrees, and I think that them being treated. This is sort of like what appears to be the result of a man going through an education system being treated as though he is a broken woman or a broken girl that needs to be repaired, but also the compiled guilt that gets sort of slammed on men throughout like school. I know that I saw a lot of it, a lot of sort of a shaming of men or like what they did wrong and how they ruined the country. And then if you're white, it's like further compiled on top of that. And then when you throw like like Theron pointed out, and I was going to say also the odds are that a lot of these people are raised by single mothers. I think that that's a factor that should not be ignored. I'm fairly certain that is all those things play in.
I have a theory on this, right? Is that boys who are raised by single mothers and then they're raised by female daycare providers and raised in a system, and these it's not every boy that's raised this way. It's certain boys who are on sort of the left hand side of the bell curve for masculine traits, right? When they finally enter into the school environment and they are put into a social situation where they have to interact with other boys, not boys that their parents pick and choose, for them, right? Their mother, says, oh, this could be a good playmate for you or whatever. It's just all of the boys, right? And they get like thrust into masculine culture, and they have no response to that. They have no preparation for it because they don't have any men in their lives to essentially let them know how masculine culture works, right? That when you get a challenge, right? Like when we were talking to Alan Franson, right? That the whole idea of his personal trainer, right? Was he was like, that guy took my balls by telling me I hit like a girl, right? And I said, okay, but he gave you the opportunity to get your balls back, didn't he? Right? He did, right? So him taking your balls was him saying, get your balls, right? Grab your balls. Grab them, right? Take them. Be a man, right?
There we go. Grab your balls as this is the perfect mantra.
Yeah.
I want to point out. One of the issues with boys going through a feminized school system isn't just that they don't have mentoring from men. A lot of what boys learn, and just like what girls learn about being a woman, what boys learn about being a man comes from watching the men around them be men. It's observation. It doesn't even have to be somebody actively teaching them a lesson. And to be honest, a lot of what kids learn about being adults in general comes from being exposed to adult behavior from both sexes. Part of my work ethic was shaped by things like my father being a teacher. I rode to school with him when I was going to the level of school at which he was teaching. He'd get up in the morning, get ready. I'd get up in the morning, get ready. We'd get in the car, we'd go to school. And one morning he was just sick as a dog. And it was he just had a cold. But it was one of those colds that you have post-nasal drip down the back of your throat all night. You get up in the morning, you've got mucus in your stomach, you're nauseous, and you're going to throw up. And, of course, being a kid, I was used to if Mom saw me throw up, she would keep me home from school. And we're about halfway to school, and my father pulls the car over, opens his door, leans out, throws up on the road, and gets a paper towel, wipes his mouth, and closes the door and drives the rest of the way to school. And I'm like, you're just going to go to school sick? And he goes, well, I'm not that sick. I was just nauseous, but it's okay now. And there really isn't anybody else that can do what I have to do today. I have to be there today. And it didn't have anything to do, his choice didn't have anything to do with how he felt. It was as much related to the need of the day, the students, and the particular curriculum that he was going over that day. And it was something that, like, he didn't look at it as a teaching moment directly. This was an indirect teaching moment. And it's things like that. These guys, will see how the men in their lives approach conflict also. They'll see how the men in their lives approach dealing with questions and dealing with issues and debate and things like that. And they learn how to do that from the men in their lives. But if you take all the men out of their lives, there's nothing left for them to learn but how women deal with conflict and how women deal with debate and how women deal with issues. And quite frequently that's through relational aggression, and they learn to exhibit the same relational aggression that women do. And so of course they're going to be passive aggressive and shit like that.
Okay, but no, Karen,
no. Let me.
I want to go to sleep at some point. All right, Jesse, come in and ask your question.
Let me.
No, because it won't be short.
Let me add to what Hannah was saying, right? Because you didn't allow me to finish my point. You muted me before I could finish my point before, right? Okay. This is going directly to what Hannah is saying. The boys who are raised among women only, they see relational aggression as normal. They see male forms of resolving conflict as bullying, right? They see that as bullying. That's where that's why you can convince all of these men who are slightly effeminate, right? Maybe they're not very just intrinsically, naturally, biologically masculine. They don't have a whole lot of testosterone. They've been raised in female-dominated, childhoods, right? And they see the male way of dealing with conflict, hashing out differences, all of those things that men often thrive in, and that often leads men to achieve. They see those as forms of bullying.
Excellent point, Karen.
And they don't
get
recognize the female form of bullying as bullying. Fucking hell, Alison, I will come to Saskatchewan just to fucking smash your computer.
All right, Darren, get in there. Oh, can you not speak now? Great. Are you having technical difficulties? Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, no, you're stuck with dead air now.
Let's just have the clusterfuck.
The dead air. Dead air is all yours.
No, wait. No, Theron, I know you're there.
Come on.
Come on. Theron.
Okay, type the question in just in case you can't talk.
Okay, just type the question in. We'll ask the question. We'll pose the question to chat. Just do it, and we'll figure this out. While Theron is doing that, that was just my point. Also, is I think everything that you guys were saying about the question that I had posed, or that the theory I was coming up with, might also explain why a lot of times, actually most of the time, male feminists hate masculinity. They despise traditional masculinity, and it comes from what they've learned, and I think there's guilt in there, and maybe they don't understand it, like what we consider normal. I want to say normal, but what we consider typical masculine behavior. They don't like it, and they really it could be like there could be some jealousy in there. I think there's a lot of guilt though. Theron, you're back. Do you have sound?
Can you hear me now?
Yay, we can hear you.
Yes, ask your question.
Wonderful. Here's JC.
Oh, sweet God, finally. Okay, so to drag it back to like academics, my question that I wanted to pose is that academics from all fields can be disingenuous, especially when you're criticizing their work, because they have a vested interest in continuing to be academics. So I was wondering if you guys think that feminist academics are more disingenuous than can be accounted for by the lack of rigor in their fields, and whether or not it's a chicken or egg thing. Like, are disingenuous people attracted to being feminist academics, or does the process of becoming a feminist academic engender disingenuity?
Oh.
Sherry, did you want to talk? Did you want to talk to this first, Anna?
Well, no, I wanted to be a devil's advocate and add to Brian's thing.
Okay, all right, but we moved on from Brian.
Yeah, we moved on, so we're done. It's all good.
Yeah, I do have something to say to this. If Anna Cherry doesn't, I will point out part of feminism's vested interest is there's money in it outside of academia, and there's money that comes into academia from industries that feminists have sort of created around the body of statistics that feminist academia has created. The domestic violence victims advocacy industry, for instance, which in the United States is funded in part by federal money, and it actually has sort of a circular thing going now. There's research funding that funds research done at these agencies that treat abuse as something that only men do only to women, or mostly men do mostly to women, and so they don't take into consideration cases where it's the other way around, and so then they come up with more statistics, more additions to that body of evidence that men abuse women and women don't abuse men, and then of course more money goes into the system and so on. So there's some funding from the outside that actually fuels this, and that funding stems from really wanting to maintain these types of industries. But that's not to say that people who are dishonest are going to be attracted to feminist research and feminist academia either, or aren't going to be attracted, because it is a sort of a low scrutiny area. Of course they're going to be attracted, and they're going to be the type that can exploit, the dramatic nature of it, the emotional nature of it, and the fact that they are not going to be so easily scrutinized to make careers out of obtaining funding to support these industries. So yeah, the unscrupulous types will be attracted to it, and it is sometimes hard to tell chicken or egg. But I think originally it was really ideological more than anything else. So it's scruples, lack of scruples, had less to do with it, I think, than a ideological obsession. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, because if it was purely about the money in the industry, then they would just expand to trying to get money out of men as victims. But something stronger than a desire for money must be stopping them. So it having an ideological basis makes sense.
Well, the thing is, you don't have quite as much ability to wrangle money because men are victims as you do to wrangle money because women are victims. There's this sort of phenomenon in society where people don't care as much about male victims as they do about female victims. And when you talk about the victims gender specifically, that brings money in its own way. And so I don't know that they would necessarily have logically explained. And see, the other thing is, it's very hard to create the type of crisis, the impression of the type of crisis that they've created an impression of, if both sexes are guilty of abuse and both sexes are victims. So they really needed a threat narrative that had one sex against the other, so they can't acknowledge male victims.
Okay, that's great analysis. Karen, did you want to say anything to that?
I was actually, since you just been mute happy, I've been just like talking in the chat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can feel free to speak now that the.
Yeah, no, but I'm not a multitasker, so I didn't hear a whole lot. What was the gist of what Hannah said?
I'll let Hannah say the gist of what she said.
The short version is I talked about the industry that academic feminists are building a body of evidence to support, and the money coming out of that industry back into feminist academia to keep that support coming. I talked about the ideological dedication that it started with, and there was a third thing, and I mentioned the fact that they have to keep their statistics polarized by gender in order to maintain the threat narrative.
Yeah, of course they do.
Based.
I look at it and I think, this isn't all about money, right? This is actually more. This is more about being in a position of being someone who should be listened to, right? Of being someone who is seen as an authority on the subject, and also, putting all of your ideological eggs in one basket. They are in one basket. If that basket gets dropped, like everything's gone, right? Everything. Can you imagine? Being like Mary Koss and spending like 30 years, right, building a body of work about rape, being a rape expert, right, being recruited by the CDC to consult on their definitions of rape and help them conduct their studies with their methodologies and their survey instruments, right? And all of that, right? And then all of a sudden it's just gone, right? Like you could hand her $3 million, right? And say, here's the $3 million to compensate you for the fact that your entire life's work is nothing. It's nothing. It's garbage. It's bunk. It's complete fucking bunkum, right? She wouldn't take the $3 million. She wouldn't, right? Because she's invested so much of her identity, of her status, of who she feels she is as a human being into this body of work that she's done, right? That is highly dubious, highly questionable, highly freaking suspect, right? But
And also potentially unethical.
yes, to other people, but not to
Hell,
her.
I'd call it flat out bullshit, but yeah.
Not to her. Not to her. She thinks she's on the right track. She thinks I guarantee you, Mary Koss is not sitting in a fucking hollowed out volcano somewhere, rubbing her hands together and saying, how can I excuse male rape today? Right? She's not doing that. No, she's convinced herself to believe what she's peddling. Right? She absolutely 100% in her brain, like the talented Mr. Ripley said, nobody ever, you never meet anyone who ever says, whoever believes that they're not a good person, right? She believes she's a good person. She believes in the things that she's peddling, and she will avoid seeing evidence to the contrary, and she will suppress evidence to the contrary because she believes with the absolute commitment that a freaking Spanish Inquisitor believes, with that level of belief, when he's freaking sticking a torch into a pile of brush underneath a stake where a person is going to burn, right? You have to have that level of belief, right? And she believes to that degree, right? And so it's not the money. The money is secondary. The money is not the problem. Well, the money is a huge problem, but it's not the primary problem. The primary problem is the belief and the investment in that belief once you have spent 30 years investing in this belief, right? How do you fucking turn around and say that you're wrong? And not only that, how do you turn around and say, not only was I wrong, but my work harmed people?
Yeah, that's a really hard statement to make. All right. I think everybody is how do you say that word? Quiescent?
Acquiescent?
No, well, acquiescent. I'm talking more like quiet, like a dog.
Quiescent.
Like, quiescent. You're all quiescent now. I think it's time. Hopefully, yes.
I was just yelling, actually, just like a minute ago.
Yeah, I know. But
I don't know whether I'm quiescent.
Well, I mean, but you're quiescent now because you're all quiet.
Well, I don't think that I'm quiet. I'm.
No, you're not quiet. You're not quiet, but you're quiescent.
Okay. All right. I will subordinate myself to the show. It's almost 10 o'clock.
Yeah, it's almost 11 o'clock where I am, and I usually go to bed now. So let's get into the final bit.
Well, it's not.
Brian.
It's not that I care about you need to go to bed. It's the show needs to be done.
Yeah, I know you don't care about me, Karen. All right, Brian. Let's
Yes.
try to get this done before you drop out again.
I know. It's been crazy today. I
I know,
am well and truly flaccid, and that means I am also ready for bed.
Okay. All
So-
right. So let's just do the final thing. Okay. Today, someone forwarded me a tweet targeting startups. There's a new service in Canada, a cloud service to offer free to new companies. When I saw that tweet and listened to the ad for the service, something gelled in my mind. This week, you might have noticed, I set myself a goal to do a shill every day on Honey Badger Radio. Shilling isn't my favorite activity. However, I set myself the goal because I realized something. People won't pay attention to these issues because they're morally right or because men have legitimate needs that are being ignored. Moral crusades are for people with access to state power, guns, and propaganda machines. We can't force people to believe we're right. Recognizing needs are for people whose vulnerability society already recognizes. We can't force people to recognize men's needs, but we can persuade them. Men's rights can't follow the path of the moral crusader, but it can follow the path of the humble salesman. A salesman in the classic sense, who has mastered the craft of recognizing and solving others' problems. The fact that we're in the right isn't enough. The fact that men are in need isn't enough. I suspect this isn't enough for men either, which is why many shy away from supporting men's rights. We have to be more than right. We have to provide value to society and its citizens. Showing, not just saying, but showing how recognition of men's issues will make the world a better place for everyone. To break through for men's issues, the breakthrough for men's issues will not come from appealing to academia or government or even corporations. These entities already find feminism sufficient for their interests. The breakthrough will come from entrepreneurs, startups, and small businesses making men's issues matter to people by convincing them to invest in them as meaningful, real-world solutions. And that's what I plan to do. So that's why I shill, in humble recognition that being right isn't enough, having need is not enough, providing a valuable service is. If you build a market, change will come. All right. And if you believe that as well, www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio.